especially over the Lesser Antilles. Now we're looking at an upper level low right over the Dominican Republic, and even some more cloudiness here in the Caribbean Sea. And this is what's worrying us right now. It's a huge area of disturbed weather. There's plenty of clouds here from Cuba all the way down to Central America, so plenty of moisture that's been streaming in into South Florida. But this is over an area that's favorable for hurricane development this time of year, so we're going to be watching it closely. This is what we think will happen within the next few days. Plenty of abundant cloud cover, lots of storms coming in, tropical air funneling in from the Caribbean Sea. But then by Thursday, whatever is in the Caribbean will probably be moving up very close to the Yucatan Peninsula, maybe as a low pressure system. Again, plenty of humidity, plenty of showers still in store for us as far as Thursday goes. And then throughout the weekend, there could still be some more moisture coming in. This time, whatever's over Puerto Rico or the Dominican Republic could be our main player by Saturday.
I want to emphasize Tropical Storm Arlene now located in the Caribbean with the heaviest rains, the thunderstorms well to the east of the center, bearing down on Grand Cayman Island, western and central Cuba today. Some of the heavier rain reaching the Florida Keys later today into tonight. You can see a well-developed arc of clouds or lightning strikes and thunderstorms, but this is well east of the center, so sort of a lopsided circulation right now. We expect that to continue to be the case as Arlene, which we've been watching first as a cluster of tropical thunderstorms, eventually emerging off of Central America, became a tropical depression yesterday and officially became Tropical Storm Arlene this morning. We're expecting it to continue to track north and then perhaps a little bit off to the north-northwest into the Gulf of Mexico. So here's your bottom line. One more view of Arlene emphasizes that band of thunderstorms on the eastern side of the storm, and that should continue to really be the case as Arlene.
South, and the thunderstorms that have to move over the center, and right now that's not happening, Jim. Matter of fact, tonight we don't expect any intensification of the system as it moves across Cuba and into the Gulf of Mexico. Here's the latest information from the Hurricane Center as of 8 p.m. You can see 40-mile-per-hour winds, nowhere close to hurricane strength. We think it's going to remain a storm all the way to the coast, maybe has a chance to intensify when it gets a little bit closer, up to about 60 miles per hour. But this is really going to be primarily a rain event, we think, not a wind event. Now, we could have some minor problems with the wind, but really a rain event. You can see the circulation is spinning around down here, basically naked. No thunderstorms with it. It can't develop when that happens. But in the meantime, look at all the rain pelting Cuba. As a matter of fact, look at this band coming in right over the Cayman Islands the next 2 or 3 hours. Watch out for heavy rain there as well. And these are the types of bands that are very hard to predict with any length of time, but could affect many portions of Florida over the next 24 to 36 hours and beyond. Here's our projected path. You can see all the thunder shower activity primarily to the north and to the east of the circulation. That's going to persist almost all the way to the coast with the dry air on the west side. The time frame for landfall would be somewhere on Saturday night, Saturday afternoon. But keep in mind, heavy rain's going to occur well in advance of that. It already is in South Florida right now. What else do we have going on out there? Well, as you look out across the northern Caribbean, a big stretch of heavy rain all the way across the northern Caribbean. Watch out for heavy rain there.
This is a very weak tropical storm, but it's loaded with rain. Take a look at the clouds. They extend right over Cuba and into South Florida. The center of circulation is right here in the Caribbean Sea. Let's take a look at the very latest numbers from the National Hurricane Center. Winds of only 40 miles per hour. It's heading north around 8 miles per hour, and it's centered 110 miles south-southeast of the westernmost tip of Cuba. Here's the forecast track. It should impact Cuba sometime tonight and then move into the Gulf of Mexico. Then it looks like by Saturday afternoon, it should make landfall between Louisiana and the Florida's Panhandle and then rain itself out over the center of the U.S. Now, there are already some tropical storm warnings for Isle of Pines, Pinar del Rio Province, Havana, as well as the dry Tortugas. The main impact that we're looking at here is going to be some gusty winds and up to 10 inches of rain in the center portion of Cuba. All this tropical moisture is coming our way, and it's going to get trapped over the Florida Peninsula because there's high pressure in the Atlantic. Nowhere to go. There's going to be plenty of instability, so it wouldn't be out of the norm if we also get some tornadic activity. Right now, it's just a deluge from the northern Keys all the way down to Key West. All of this is heading into the Gulf of Mexico, and because of all the expected heavy rainfall, we are under a flood watch tonight through tomorrow at least 8 p.m. Now, we are expecting anywhere between 3 to 5 inches of rain between the Keys and Fort Myers, and for us in Miami and Fort Lauderdale, 1 to 3 inches. I'll have more of our forecast in weather.
Now, We expect Arlene to continue on its northward track right now at about 10 miles per hour, maybe a little bit west of north. Already in the southeastern Gulf, should get to the northern Gulf by tomorrow afternoon, the center inland by Sunday morning. But remember, this yellow swath only projects the location of the center of Arlene. The impacts well east of the center. This is a very lopsided storm. You want to see the definition of lopsided? Take a look at this satellite image. Boy, talk about a picture worth 1,000 words. You draw a line through the center of the Gulf of Mexico, and west of that line, Texas, Louisiana, generally dry and sunny, but east of that line, that's where all the rain and even some tropical storm force wind gusts will be. The center of Arlene now. We can show you, been tracking it now for about 3 days since it emerged off of Central America as just a cluster of thunderstorms. It's now about 50 miles north of the western tip of Cuba.
Hay una advertencia de inundación para la costa.
Southern Florida, from Key Largo through Homestead and now north into the rest of the state. Beaches in Marco Island were deserted as people headed inside.
Well, we came the season. Arlene is just about 245 miles southeast of Pensacola, Florida. If you're tracking at home, that would be 27.1 north, 86.1 west, and maximum sustained winds 70 miles per hour. So again, still a tropical storm at this time. And we do have tropical storm warnings up in effect anywhere from Grand Isle over to Steinhatchee River, and that does mean that tropical storm force winds likely to be felt in your area and tropical storm conditions overall. The overall impacts of this system will be fairly low, but we will have to watch out for the rainfall because that's going to be our biggest threat with Arlene. And as you can see, the heaviest of the rain still well offshore just to the south of the Florida Panhandle, but we've seen some lighter bands moving through parts of the southeast and now some moderate rainfall now into parts of western Florida. We dealt with some heavier rain just along the coast, and that's where we do have a tornado watch in effect until 8 a.m. over parts of western Florida, so we'll have to watch out in places like Tampa, Fort Myers, and Naples. Through the late night and early mornings, it does look like the line of storms that was sitting just off the coast has now weakened somewhat, but still the rainfall is pretty moderate to heavy at times along I-75. And to the Tampa area, we're seeing a few breaks from here or there, but the rain, it's continuing to make its way northward, so it won't be long before the Gulf of Mexico at about 16 miles per hour, 245 miles southeast of Pensacola, Florida, and those winds still around 70 miles per hour, so it's still a tropical storm at this time, but there is some strengthening expected within the next 12 to say maybe 18 hours. So by the time it makes landfall, we could be talking about a minimal hurricane, Arlene, as we get into the weekend. But for now, it does certainly look like those bright cloud tops that we were seeing earlier in the evening have somewhat warmed, and that indicates weakening. So we are seeing, again, some of the moisture, or at least some of the rainfall and showers and storms embedded with some of these outer bands kind of weakening a bit, but we're sure to see the storms kind of refire as we get through the late night hours. Here's the projected path of Arlene as we take a look as it moves through the Gulf of Mexico. It is expected to make its way somewhere in between Mississippi and the western panhandle of Florida by Saturday afternoon, and then eventually continuing to head northward, impacting some areas of northern Alabama and Mississippi right on into Tennessee. But of course, it's not important to focus on where the center will make landfall because we will be feeling the impacts, of course, further east of the center as we already have been into parts of Florida. And that's where
Cantori from the Weather Channel. And the first thing we have to know, Jim, is how are the weather conditions there right now?
Well, actually, this is some of the best weather we've had all morning. We've got a break in the rainfall, and incredibly, we've actually had the temperatures get a little bit warmer. So some of that warmer air, if you will, has kind of sank down from this thing. Typical in a disorganized system like we're having in through here. We have rains come in bands, and those rains have let up at this point. But believe me, when they come in, we get nice and soaked out here. Look behind me here at the Gulf of Mexico. I mean, this is just incredible. And I would actually say that there's been more sand added to the beach right now than there has been taken away. And what that's doing, guys, is allowing these waves, as they continue to roll in, breaking about 8 to 10 feet right off the beach, to come right up on top of this berm that's sitting here. So we have seen some breach. Look at this. We got all this seaweed around. Got an old flipper. Just kind of hoping to get the whole set, you know. But it has breached on over and made its way on down. And what we're going to do is head up to that deck here as we get over the next 2 to 3 hours, because what's going to happen is we're going to hit a surge, probably about 3 to 5 feet, and then waves will actually be higher than they are right now. We'll have more like 12 feet breaking at the coast. So we're going to see this thing breached. And no doubt water's coming over the top of this newly formed berm here that they did on Pensacola Beach.
All right. Also a big concern, tornadic activity. I know you're under a tornado watch right now. Have you seen any kind of rotation that worries you at all?
No, we haven't. Nothing right now that I see, certainly, or even on radar that's coming in. But, you know, you never know. These things can kind of spin up over the water and then rotate in. And, you know, if we get a warning, we're going to take cover.
All right. Now, Jim, the only other thing we were talking about yesterday is that in South Florida specifically, I know you're in North Florida, but there was so much rainfall associated with this tropical storm, more so than all 4 storms that we saw down here last season. So it really was a soaker and still continues to be so.
Yeah, I mean, that rain was strung out well ahead of this thing when it was southwest of Grand Cayman, or even off the western tip of Cuba. So you were already getting the rain bands, and then as it moved on up through the eastern Gulf, you still got it. You had that nice easterly flow. That's why we unfortunately lost a lady to that rip current there yesterday, and that helped to kind of set up that convergence zone, that area where the showers are developing. And yeah, you just got pummeled with the rainfall. As a matter of fact, you may wind up with more rainfall in South Florida than we will get here in the Panhandle, because this thing has really dried out coming north.
Yeah, interesting to note. Thank you so much. We appreciate you being there live for us. And we'll go ahead and get back.
You betcha.
Thank you, Jim. We'll get back to some local weather now. He made a great point. We could see more rainfall here in South Florida than those who are affected as the storm moves on shore. Look at the rainfall still sitting on the East Coast right now. Pretty much everything east of 95 from about Broward County and maybe even a little bit of Dade all the way up towards Orlando and even north of that. We continue to see rainfall for today. The temperatures are warm. This means deep tropical moisture will easily move back in the area for today, and we do expect more showers. Could be a thunderstorm, but nonetheless, don't be surprised if you see another soaker in your neighborhood for today. As Arlene makes its track towards the Gulf Coast, you can see, let's go ahead and move in a little bit closer. You can see that the broad circulation is starting to lose some of its intensity. Not as strong of a storm as we saw just yesterday when it was pushing over into the Gulf and affecting South Florida. So good news for this is, as it makes landshore, you still have to worry about tornadoes. In fact, I'm going to go ahead and show you the tornado
northwest at 15 miles per hour. It has slowed down somewhat, but what about its future track? Where do you see it headed next?
Well, it looks like it's moving straight north now, which makes it moving toward the coastline a little bit faster because the coast is closer to it there. You can see that on the radar imagery here. You see the circulation spinning around right there. Well, it was moving north-northwest, which is this general direction. Now, look at the center of circulation, pretty much straight north, right toward Pensacola. Now, if you're over here in New Orleans, you're going to say, tropical storm? What tropical storm? There's no rain over here. The winds are relatively light. It's going to be a beautiful day. You could have a picnic out there. Maybe some showers flaring up. It may be not that perfect. But most of the strong winds are right on the east side of the circulation and out in here in some of these rain bands. Strongest winds will be in the heavy rain. Heavy rain is still pulling up over Florida, but not near as prolific as it was earlier. But keep in mind, some of this rain is up into Alabama and will continue to spread north over the next 24 hours. So inland rain threat is going to be a big one. Here it is on the satellite image. You can see the circulation center there. Look at all this tropical moisture in here. Once the afternoon heating kicks in, we're going to see a lot of thunderstorms flare up and the possibility for an isolated tornado or two spreading in that area. So here's a potential from this. Our biggest potential is for localized flooding. When we say localized, that means we don't expect a widespread flood event. We don't expect a Hurricane Allison major flood disaster in any city from this, but the possibility for isolated flooding or scattered flooding around the area. The rest of the Gulf of Mexico, Texas, wonderful day there with offshore winds, great in Galveston for the beaches there. As we go out into the Caribbean, still some showers lingering over the northern islands. Watch out for a possibility of an isolated flash flood, particularly in the mountain areas of
as it continues to work up through western parts of Tennessee, lifting up the Ohio Valley, and that's where some of the deepest tropical moisture continues to surge off to the north. Now, besides the heavy rain that we've seen with Arlene, we also had some very gusty winds. Around the Florida Panhandle yesterday, some locales had wind gusts between 50 and 60 miles per hour. Now again, where does Arlene go from this point on? Well, keep in mind the determining factor is the upper level wind flow. And we have a high pressure system situated across the eastern seaboard, that big old Bermuda high pressure. And with a clockwise flow of winds around that means a strong southerly wind flow. So the remains, what's left over of Arlene, will be surging up towards the Ohio Valley, causing us some very persistent rains, we think, for at least the next 24 hours from Dayton, Ohio, all the way down through Nashville. Now, because we will see some very heavy rains, perhaps well over 2 and 3 inches of additional rainfall for some folks, that means a chance to see some flooding, and flash flood watches continue right now for parts of the Ohio Valley into central Tennessee, including Nashville. Flash flood watches too all the way down into northern parts of Mississippi. Now, as we get away from what's left of Arlene, though, the rest of the tropics remaining relatively quiet. Not much to write home about across the Gulf of Mexico. On into the Caribbean, we've got some scattered showers and storms here, a little trough of low pressure moving on in. But again, nothing is showing any signs of organization
On our tropical weather, and so far we've gotten through our first storm of the season, Arlene. Some of those remnants still providing a lot of moisture across the Northeast, but next up, Bret, and we'll have to see if we get to that next. As speaking climatologically, we normally see development in the Caribbean and in the Gulf of Mexico. The Gulf of Mexico, fairly quiet, but in the Caribbean, that is where we are finding an area of interest. But out in the Atlantic, things are fairly quiet, so we're looking pretty good here. But we do have a trough in place across parts of the Caribbean, and it looks like right on the east side of it, that's where we're seeing some convection flaring up. Doesn't look all that impressive now, but the pressures are low, so we're continuing to keep an eye out here because we could be seeing development within the next several days, because of course with those upper level winds kind of weakening, that could allow for some development. And of course, Air Force reconnaissance planes are on standby in case they do have to fly into this area of interest. As of now, it looks like rainfall will be a concern for any land area, so we are watching out for maybe some possible flooding over areas of Hispaniola that could be in line for some wet weather.
Some closed circulation, and we're actually looking at our second tropical depression of the season. Can you give us more details about that depression?
That's right, Cheryl, and here's the information. 19.1 north, 95.7 west. That's just offshore Veracruz, Mexico. You see the low pressure center down here. Winds 35 miles per hour, poised to become a tropical storm just before landfall tomorrow. So it's not very far from the coast. Part of it's already over the coast producing rain, moving west-northwest at 7. Pressure estimated at 1,004 millibars. And we do have some tropical storm warnings up from Veracruz down here to Tampico, Mexico. Tropical storm warnings over the next 24 hours. Somebody may get some wind gusts to fairly significant wind strengths there. Now let's look at what we see on the satellite imagery from it. There you see the circulation. The western portion of the circulation almost on land now, and heavy rain is beginning near Veracruz and will spread up toward Tampico the next 24 hours. What do we expect from this system overall? Wind-wise, we don't expect much of anything. Surge and waves, not much at all. Right now, the wave action out there is less than 8 feet, and the surge is not a surge-prone coastline along Mexico there. Rainfall potential will put it medium. In the higher elevation, somebody could see some localized flooding, so be careful if you're between Tampico and Veracruz inclusive for the potential for some heavy rainfall the next 24 hours. That's what Tropical Depression 2 or possibly Tropical Storm Bret is likely to do. Possibility of a power outage here or there right near the center of circulation. Now here it is down here. This system's moving off toward the west-northwest. This massive cloud is moving off toward the northeast, and it's going to put a damper on your vacation there in Destin, Florida, basically from Pensacola all the way over to Apalachicola. Rainy, cloudy, sort of miserable weather. The good news is there are breaks in between of that heavy rain, and that is good news. But in the meantime, we expect the rain to continue in Florida. The good news is the tropical Atlantic is relatively quiet from the Antilles to Puerto Rico all the way to Honduras. Nothing else brewing there. And our tropical storm Calvin of yesterday has become a tropical depression. The circulation is almost gone as it moves away from the coast. And the good news is the rain threat there is going away, and the 6 to 10 foot surf will go away soon too.
2 miles per hour, and now it's centered 60 miles north-northeast of Veracruz, still moving west-northwest at around 5 miles per hour. There are already some tropical storm warnings from Veracruz to Tampico. That's because we expect that is exactly where it'll make landfall sometime during the overnight hours, and then tomorrow afternoon it should start to rain itself out, becoming just a low pressure system.
The 11 p.m. advisory, 10 p.m. Central Daylight Time, 40 mile per hour winds. So this is a tropical storm of relatively weak proportions, moving west-northwest at 5, so not moving all that fast. Then the last reconnaissance report, the pressure's gone up a little bit, which is good news. So the circulation has become a little location to that location. The circulation center is right between these two thunderstorm clusters. There's one cluster, there's the other. Right between it, right there. Circulation is very small it's over for Veracruz. The wind is offshore, aloft. At the surface, it's been calm for the last 4 hours. You're not going to get much out of this at all. But as it moves to the north, some heavy rain is going to come into Tampico. And the thing we're most worried about is the potential for some flooding rain, particularly in the afternoon hours tomorrow.
Moving into Mexico, and that's where we're finding Tropical Storm Bret. With winds to 40 miles per hour, that's barely into tropical storm category. And actually the wind field around this is pretty tight, so we're not going to see too many problems as far as that goes. But of course, pushing into land, it's the moisture we're really going to want to watch out for. Before I get off this frame, you can also see all that tropical moisture still streaming into the southeast. That's going to stay a problem for us. But here's that closer look at Bret, and you can see right over Tampico, we're looking at all that moisture moving in, and you've got the coastal plains, but then the elevation goes up pretty fast, so especially for some
investigating the Caribbean this afternoon. So let's take a look at the tropics for you, show you what we're talking about.
Right off the top, first at 5, a tropical wave upgraded moments ago to tropical depression number 3. It's gaining strength, but will it affect us in South Florida?
Checking outside the 7 News studios, you're looking live over a beautiful picture at this point. But will the holiday be a day of fun in the sun or just another miserable Monday? We have your 4th of July forecast. Good afternoon. This system to our south is picking up some momentum.
Yeah, will it get strong enough to become Tropical Storm Cindy? Meteorologist Tom Johnson is monitoring all the weather developments tonight. Tom?
Well, that is the magical question, isn't it, Charles? I think that is possible once it gets across the Yucatan Peninsula and into the southern Gulf of Mexico. It is moving northwest across the northwestern Caribbean, eventually moving across the Yucatan tonight and into Monday, then eventually emerging into the Bay of Campeche, which is the southernmost region of the Gulf of Mexico. But let's talk about this. This is TD number 3, Tropical Depression number 3, as of the 5 p.m. advisory. This advisory was prompted by the recon aircraft that went in today and found that winds are sustained at 35 miles per hour. There also is a closed circulation at the surface, so we do have a tropical area of low pressure, a tropical depression. Latest coordinates, if you're going to start tracking with us, 18.4 north, 87.1 west. It is moving northwest at 8. And if you know Cozumel, Mexico, it's 145 miles to the south of Cozumel. This is where they form in early July. One of the hot spots, Northwest Caribbean. The great news about this, it's not going
with the big picture of the Atlantic Basin, and right off the bat you see 2 things that you're a little concerned with, and I don't blame you, because you know what, we're concerned with them too. First one, tropical wave moving through the islands into the eastern Caribbean. Will this develop? Well, it certainly looks like it could. Number 2. Yeah, this is Tropical Depression number 3, and let's get the latest on that right away. Tropical Depression centered about 20.7 north, 89.2 west. Basically, it has moved across the Yucatan Peninsula, and the center of circulation emerging now in the Gulf of Mexico. A lot of the convection on the eastern flank, if you will, but does it bear watching? Absolutely. Will it develop into a tropical storm? Perhaps. That's why we're going to keep a very close watch on this. All interests along the Gulf Coast need to keep it tuned here to the Weather Channel, because it certainly could provide us with a lot more in the way of rainfall. So here's Cancun, here's Cozumel. You can see the center of circulation now off of the shoreline of the Yucatan Peninsula. Now, this is the other tropical wave I was telling you about. We're very concerned about it because it certainly could develop into something, tropically speaking, could become a tropical storm, certainly, in the next several days. Will it affect the lower 48? Really too soon to tell, but like I said, you'll want to keep it tuned here to the Weather Channel. What's going on in the Pacific? Well, here too we have a tropical depression, 4E, winds at 35 miles per hour, movement north-northwest at 7 miles per hour, and we do have some advisories in effect, so you'll want to know that.
Season way busier than we were last year at this time, can you believe it? But we've got a storm here off the coast of Mexico. This is Tropical Storm Dora in the eastern Pacific. Also now in the Gulf of Mexico, Tropical Depression 3, this formed yesterday, came over the Yucatan, now making its way into the Gulf. Could have some impact here along the Gulf Coast, so if you have interest here in Louisiana, pay particularly close attention to Tropical Depression number 3. The biggest impact we believe from this storm will probably be rain, potentially flooding rain. So we'll keep an eye on it for you. Just keep it tuned here as this system looks like it's going to make its way a little bit farther northward. Also now recently named Tropical Depression 4. This is now just off the coast of South America, pushing its way ever so slowly westward. This one may become a big player. looks like things could come together for this potentially, and I say that because it's early in the game, potentially to become a hurricane. Let's give you the stats on 3 first. 360 miles south of the mouth of the Mississippi River. Winds are at 35 miles per hour with a north-northwest movement at 13 miles per hour. And again, with that track, that does bring it somewhere along the coastline here around Louisiana. So keep that in mind, maybe a couple of days away. And the biggest impact, we believe, will be rain. Now the stats on 4, 100 miles west-northwest of Grenada with winds at 30 miles per hour and moving west-north.
Well organized right now in the Weather Center.
That's right, Wendy. We are busy back there today, but it's not because of the local forecast, because honestly, guys, we're just looking at a very hot one, but really not much, if any, in the way of precipitation expected. 81 degrees right now, about 90 towards noontime, and then 91 for the expected high. But the way it'll feel today is a different story. Add the heat and humidity together, and it's going to feel like it's between 108 to 113, cooler feeling by the coast, but it's going to be a warm one out there. You are looking at tropical depression number 4, maybe soon to be Tropical Storm Dennis. We will have to wait and see. Right now it's moving off to the west at about 15 miles an hour as of the latest update. Winds at 35, gusting to 45. Take this system out in time, and we see a couple of things that we want to talk to you about. First and foremost, it appears to be heading towards our neck of the woods, and that's because it in fact is. And look, take a look here with the green and yellow come into together there. That denotes it turning into a Category 1 hurricane between Thursday and Friday, and maybe affecting us.
For South Florida. Again, with the concern in the Caribbean, off in the eastern Caribbean, where right now you're seeing a lot of scattered showers and storms on the color satellite. What you're seeing in the green, the reds and the oranges here, spreading toward the west around the ABC Islands, around the northern coast of South America. This is associated with tropical depression number 4, the center of the storm right now, about 415 miles south-southeast from San Juan, Puerto Rico. Again, the latest intermediate advisory has not come down yet from the National Hurricane Center, but so far sustained winds at 35 miles per hour. It will continue to strengthen today, possibly even into a tropical storm later on this afternoon. Tropical Storm Dennis. The forecast track, again, bringing the storm over the southern portions of Española come tomorrow afternoon. Watch as the cone of error begins to widen out as it spreads toward the southeastern Gulf, and you can bet right here in South Florida we are anticipating to be within this cone of error come the weekend. The question mark here is whether or not this ridge of high pressure over our east is going to hold on for the system to continue to veer toward the Gulf, or whether or not it's going to slacken off and we're going to start to see it make a little more toward a northeasterly curvature toward the Sunshine State, something we will continue to watch in the next couple of days. Tropical Storm Cindy
near Houma, Louisiana in about 6 hours or so, pressure down to 1,000 millibars. Let's look at the latest satellite image, and you can see the core of strong winds is very close to this tight little center, which is right in here. Out off to the east is where all the heavy rain is. That's where most of the impact is going to be from rain, but the wind is going to be confined to this narrow little area when it comes onshore in Louisiana. May make a second landfall in Mississippi the next 12 hours or so. Here's a projected path as it takes a landfall here. It may take a turn then to the east-northeast, and this is where the heavy rain is going to spread up toward the northeast into Alabama and Georgia. Our expected impacts from our Tropical Storm Cindy: winds relatively low. We could see some sporadic power outages along the coast. Rainfall is the big threat there, some significant flooding possible, and we have the waves and surges low. We don't see any big wave action there. We could see some minor coastal flooding at the coastline. Here's a projected path where we have localized flooding likely and possible all the way up into the Atlanta area the next 24 to 36 hours. Now, we also have Tropical Storm Dennis out there. It's out in the Atlantic in the central Caribbean south of Puerto Rico. It's getting better organized and taking a turn basically toward the west-northwest, heading in the general direction of Kingston, Jamaica. We'll give you
strength in the eastern Caribbean. It could become a hurricane by the end of the week. Dennis would be the first hurricane of this young season.
And that's not the only storm we're keeping an eye on for you. Let's get right to meteorologist Trent Eric now for the latest forecasted tracks. Trent?
Well, Matt and Lori, we are busy at the Weather Center because not only are we tracking Dennis, but we've been tracking Tropical Storm Cindy as well. Now, Cindy is off into the Gulf of Mexico, preparing to come ashore sometime late tonight or early tomorrow morning, but our interests are a little more to the south and the east, down towards Tropical Storm Dennis. Now we are tracking these two tropical storms. Let's take a closer view 2 of Dennis. We're going to go down south of Hispaniola between the Windward Islands. Here's Puerto Rico, Jamaica to the far left-hand screen at home. Notice this storm has a pretty good rotation with it and is starting to develop a little more of a core here around the center of circulation. This storm is becoming better organized, and it's also continuing to strengthen. As of the 5 o'clock advisory, which just came in just a couple of minutes ago, the winds are at 40 miles per hour, a minimal tropical storm, but as this storm becomes better organized, the storm is forecast to go into a more favorable environment in the days to come. Winds are gusting at 50 miles per hour, and the Hurricane Center expects Tropical Storm Dennis to become the first hurricane of the season in about a day and a half. Right now, if you're tracking at home, 14.2 to the north, 68.3 to the west. This storm is still a little under 1,200 miles to the southeast of the Miami-Fort Lauderdale area. Pressure at 1,005 millibars. Here's what we're all wanting to see. The forecast track by 2 o'clock tomorrow afternoon as a tropical storm in the green shades here in the center line. We expect the storm to continue to move off to the west-northwest. And as we head through 2 a.m. on Thursday, we start to see a little yellow here. That means a Category 1 hurricane sometime in the early morning hours of Thursday. As we continue the forecast track on out through Thursday afternoon, we continue to see it moving just to the south of Cuba as a Category 1 storm and eventually moving towards the extreme western parts of Cuba and the Isle of Youth sometime by 2 o'clock or say Friday afternoon before it looks like the storm will move into the Gulf of Mexico. Notice as this 5 o'clock advisory, parts of South Florida, it looks like Palm Beach, Broward out of the cone of air, but again, this is several days out, but there is good news with this forecast. It looks like the center of circulation, the strongest part of the storm, will stay in between the Yucatan Channel and parts of the lower Keys. What that would mean for us is perhaps a heavy rain event, as remember this is the right side of circulation that would bring a lot of moisture across the Keys and a lot of rainfall across Broward and Miami-Dade County. From Dennis, we'll check in with Tropical Storm Cindy, 70 miles per hour. We're just 4 miles per hour of becoming a hurricane. And as you can see, New Orleans, Mississippi, all the way over towards Alabama, already seeing the clouds and rain showers come in. We've got much more on these storms. We're talking about Dennis and his forecast track as we head out into time by tomorrow afternoon. Tropical storm, but keep your close eye towards this center line right here and watch the shades of green turns to yellow as we head through 2 a.m. Thursday. Notice it gets a little lighter there, and then by Friday, a Category 1 hurricane is what the National Hurricane Center is predicting as the storm continues to move west-northwest. Now that is Thursday afternoon around 2 o'clock, and then by Friday, the storm continues to move more off to the west. High pressure ridge is holding on strong, and that's going to keep the storm off to the south, but that begins to break down late in the forecast period, and the trough deepens into the central and eastern parts of the U.S., and that's going to allow the storm to take a little more of a northerly turn. We hope later than sooner, and that would be a good forecast for us in South Florida, as that would push the storm into the Gulf away from South Florida, making a direct impact. Here's the satellite imagery of Dennis. You can see a pretty good core of convection here across the center. The storm is getting very well organized, and it continues to do so, and that's why the forecast is for this storm to become a hurricane in the next 36 to 48 hours. On up towards Cindy, you can see it getting very close now to the marshy areas here of southeastern New Orleans, towards the Gulf Coast of Mississippi, Mobile Bay. Right now, this storm has 70 mile per hour sustained wind, so it's only 4 shy of becoming a hurricane itself, but it looks like intensification chances for this are very, very weak, as it should sustain right now as a strong tropical storm before making landfall. You can see right now the center of circulation off to the south, continuing to move in. The radar here from the mainland area starting to pick up on the showers and thunderstorms coming in. Some rain bands out ahead of this through the northern parts of Mississippi.
It's raising the sea level ultimately here in southern Louisiana 4 to 6 feet above what it normally is. And this is already very low country, so there's a lot of inundation down here in some of the fishing communities here in southern Louisiana and also here in coastal Mississippi. In addition to that, a tornado threat exists from here to the right, out to Pensacola. So from Quinns Parish, Louisiana, who called in with the correct pronunciation of the town Belle Chase here in southern Louisiana. You were under a tornado warning about an hour ago. That's been canceled. But tornadoes are known to spin up from tropical storms or hurricanes as they make their way onshore. This one, a strong tropical storm There's your tornado watch right now. And of course, we like to keep you one step ahead of the storm by giving you the latest.
The Central Caribbean packing winds of 50 miles per hour. It's heading off to the west-northwest, and it is expected to strengthen as it does so. So we're talking rain, possibly even some flash flooding and mudslides over Hispaniola. It's now located about 345 miles southeast of Port-au-Prince, Haiti. And of course, with Dennis continuing to move through the Caribbean, those outer rain bands have certainly impacted places like Puerto Rico, where we have dealt with some heavier showers earlier into the evening hours. Now it looks like we're beginning to see some of that rain moving into the Dominican Republic and then also around the Haiti area as well. And as you can see, we dealt with the wet weather throughout the early evening hours. Now just some spotty light rain showers moving over Puerto Rico.
Storm Cindy is located about 25 miles east-northeast of New Orleans, Louisiana. The winds continue to come down in this area. The biggest concern now is flooding and, of course, still under a tornado watch until 10 o'clock Central Time, Mobile and Montgomery.
And of course, we're still seeing impacts from Cindy just about everywhere. Localized flooding from the heavy rain showers, between 6 and 8 inches in some localized areas. Strong gusty winds, minor coastal flooding, deadly rip currents for the next few days, and isolated tornadoes.
And as you can see, another storm, well, it's building in the Atlantic Basin on the heels of Cindy, and hopefully we can get that up there for you. There we go. Thank you, Hillary. As you can see it here in the Eastern Caribbean just coming in, and we'll be getting a new advisory on Dennis. And the feeling is, you know, this is continuing to strengthen.
Como bien decía Lizeth, del primer sistema tropical en llegar a ser huracán durante esta temporada. El viento está apenas por debajo de su umbral. Llega a esta hora a unas 70 millas por hora. Este es el informe, el boletín de las 11 de la mañana, hora local. Así que, por supuesto, está fresquita la información. La presión ha bajado muchísimo. Signo entonces que el sistema se está fortaleciendo, está ganando más intensidad y que, por supuesto, confirma la posición de que hacia horas de esta tarde podríamos ya tener el primer sistema tropical huracán durante esta temporada. Veamos la imagen rápidamente del sistema. Lo tenemos ahí, bastante concentrada a esta hora, a diferencia de ayer. Todavía está amplia la circulación, la parte más débil, pero fíjense, en esta porción ya está mucho más concentrada y, por supuesto, eso es un signo evidente, inequívoco de que el sistema se está intensificando, así que mucho cuidado. Teniendo en cuenta ese cuidado, hay varios gobiernos que han emitido alertas.
Off with the tropics, because here's where there's the most to explain to you at this hour. Right now, we are still looking at Tropical Storm Dennis. The inner cores actually looks like it's in its organizing stages, but honestly, this system, as it continues to push off to the west-northwest, is not only going to run into an environment with low shear, but also an environment with very warm water temperatures. These two things added together are really going to help this system to intensify over the course of the next few days. So we are going to watch this system likely become at least a Category 1 hurricane in the next 12 hours, and then perhaps more as time goes on. So we're going to continue to watch that. As of now, though, the winds are sustained at just 4 shy of Category 1 hurricane force strength here. 70-mile-an-hour sustained winds. Gusts are over into hurricane category there. They're at 85-mile-an-hour gusts. Now, Tropical Storm Dennis, as of Wednesday at 11 a.m., 15.4 north and 71.5 west. That brings it about 920 miles to the southeast of Miami. The movement is off to the west-northwest at about 15 miles an hour. Now here's a look at the latest forecast track. Right now the system's still a tropical storm, but look how it transitions into yellow very quickly there. And the yellow, of course, denotes Category 1 hurricane strength by 8 a.m. Thursday, nearing the coastline of Jamaica, but kind of skimming the very far eastern point of that country. Now 8 p.m. Thursday, it is still a Category 1, but somewhat transitioning into a Category 2 at this point, and then quickly off to Category 3 strength, running into the very warm waters. It's going to run parallel to Cuba here. 8 a.m. Friday as a Category 3 storm. Now we take it out in time farther, and it passes the western tip of Cuba near the Isle of Youth as a Category 3, continues out in time here. And take a look as we take it out through to 8 a.m. Sunday. The system is now off into the Gulf of Mexico. But did it skim us? Well, we're out of the cone for now here in Broward and Miami-Dade counties. But into the Keys, what does that mean for us if you live down in the Keys? Well, we've drawn the line out for you so you can see just barely depression now. So this is a rapidly weakening system, and we did not see any effects from it. The radar picture is still showing showers and thunderstorms in the mix with this, but it's going to continue.
Now, like it could possibly become a Category 3 hurricane sometime on Friday. Now, what happened earlier today, we had a hurricane hunter go in and telling us at 5 o'clock that the winds still weren't strong enough to be a hurricane, so it was classified as a tropical storm. But then by 6, another hurricane hunter went in and said, yes, indeed, we had a hurricane right here, 80-mile-an-hour winds gusting to 98. It is still moving towards the west-northwest at 14 miles per hour, centered 315 miles east-southeast of Kingston, Jamaica. And by tomorrow in the afternoon, I think that Charlie should be, I should say Dennis, should be right over Jamaica, pounding them with at least 80 to 90 mile per hour winds. Then it should continue gaining strength, and it could become a Category 3 by the time it makes landfall in western Cuba. There you can see Category 3 around 2 p.m. Saturday, emerging into the Gulf of Mexico. Then it's going to take a nice little turn over towards the northeast, and it's probably going to make landfall in Pensacola, so that's going to be a headache for the Sunshine State. Now, the forecast is very determined by this high-pressure system in the Atlantic. If this by any chance wobbles a little bit to the east, then this whole forecast cone will do the same. So right now it is very important that we all track it within the next 24, 36, possibly 48 hours to see if this high pressure holds and stays firm where it's at. Now let's take a look at the tropical storm warnings that are in effect. We still have a tropical storm warning for the western part of the Dominican Republic. The rest are hurricane warnings and watches. A hurricane warning for Haiti, Jamaica, eastern Cuba, hurricane watch for central Cuba and the Cayman Islands. Now let's take a look at what's left of what once was Tropical Storm Cindy. Right now it's just a small area of circulation right here. Still plenty of rainfall for parts of Alabama and Georgia, and this should rain itself out within the next.
And talk about this storm. Some of the aircraft reconnaissance flights now reporting that an eye may be beginning to form with this hurricane as Dennis is intensifying. As you can see here, a central core of convection. Outflow aloft still very impressive with this storm, and it's rather symmetrical now. The outer bands here looking very good as well. It's forecast to continue to move just to the north of Jamaica and move towards the eastern parts of Cuba in the next couple of days, possibly as strong as a Category 2 as it gets right in through this general vicinity, but already bringing heavy showers and thunderstorms to parts of the Dominican Republic and Puerto Rico. Here's the Puerto Rico radar. Oh, well over a half inch today officially here at Puerto Rico, an inch to an inch and a quarter here in the eastern parts of the Dominican Republic. So heavy rain showers already making their way through. Here are the latest watches and warnings. You see in the red here, hurricane warnings in effect for Haiti, Jamaica, and now the government of the Grand Cayman Islands, including Grand Cayman, Little Cayman, and Cayman Brac, now upgraded out of 11 o'clock to a hurricane warning. Now the computer models are fairly consistent and they're all clustered together through about 72 hours, but past that, once we get in the Gulf of Mexico, they've been to diverge a bit. And what that means is the steering currents are forecast to possibly break down, and that's going to allow for different forecasts from different scenarios on the computer models. Some take the storm all the way over to Louisiana. Some are now moving the storm a little further to the east to the panhandle of Florida and the delta regions of both Mississippi and Alabama. But we're pretty consistent. The storm will move south of our area in the days to come, and it's all because of this high pressure ridge steering the storm off to the west-northwest through the extreme western parts of Cuba, and again about 72 hours. So for tonight, we'll
for Dennis. And before I get to that, I also want to mention a wave coming off Africa we'll keep our eye on. But of course, Dennis is the big player right now, and with including some of that information from the hurricane hunters and all the other data that the National Hurricane Center uses. Well, as of 8 o'clock, we have an upgrade. Dennis is now a Category 2 with winds to 105 miles an hour. Headed a little more northwest, but that might just be a little bit of a wobble. It's been headed kind of west-northwest overall. And for July, this is very rare. This has been an unusual year, picking off fast. The last time we had a hurricane was Danny in 2003. The last time a major hurricane was back in '96, but only 3 in 100 years major hurricanes that have hit the United States. And it does look like this storm has that potential. Already a Cat 2, but a high Cat 2 about to pass into that Category 3 threshold. So you could see where that was already pushing very close to Jamaica into this afternoon. We expect that center of the storm to pass by. So with that, we already have all these warnings up. You're watching for not just the winds, but the field around this is fairly wide. So the wind field is going out over 100 miles an hour tropical storm strength. But in addition to that, heavy rains for Jamaica, parts of Haiti, even Cuba. So those are areas where you're going to want to watch for the flooding. And because of all of those concerns, we've already seen the Jamaica airport close down. Some places looking at maybe a foot of rain. So you're certainly going to want to watch that, especially on some of those higher elevations. Now, over the next couple of days, We're going to continue to watch this in Cuba and parts of the Caymans. Into Friday, you're going to be monitoring this storm. By the start of the weekend in the Keys, at the very least, it looks like the west side of Florida is going to get some of that wind, and then it looks like we could have a landfall somewhere in
live in just a moment.
But first, let's get the latest forecast track with meteorologist Megan Glaros. Megan?
Thanks a lot, Mark and Wendy. We are carefully watching Dennis, monitoring his every movement at this hour. The system has intensified. The wind field has gotten a bit larger since our last update. It is going to continue to move off now, it looks like, to the north and west, which basically means it is going to wobble around Jamaica instead of making a pass over the eastern tip of that island, as was anticipated earlier today. So somewhat good news for the folks in Jamaica. However, this northwesterly curve is actually going to affect us a bit more. So you're looking at the system right now. It's got some pretty good convection in it. Plus, we think we're starting to see the hints of the eye at this moment, right about there, the center of circulation. So as we'll continue to watch that system, the 11 a.m. update this morning, the absolute latest, 18.0 north, 75.6 west. Now, folks, that puts it 620 miles to the southeast of Miami. Winds to 105, gusting to 125, and the movement off to the northwest at 15. Now, the forecast track has changed since 5 a.m., the latest track. Now, as we look at the 11 o'clock information here, it is still expected to become a Category 3 storm, then passing over Cuba, perhaps briefly back down to a Category 2. But we take it out in time farther here, and you can see that the entire track has been pushed a bit farther off to the east. This now includes more of the Florida Keys than was in the last update. We will continue to tell you about that. As of now, you can see that, yes, Miami-Dade County from Golden Beach southward, on the west coast from Bonita Beach southward, under a tropical storm watch, as shown by the green color, and the Florida Keys under a hurricane watch at this hour. This means that we could see conditions of that magnitude within the next 36 hours. We'll keep you posted and have more details in just a bit. Mark.
All right. Well, as Megan just said, as the Keys are under a hurricane watch at this point, tourists have been ordered out because of the hurricane and where it might go. We've got Local 10's Anjanette Flowers down there standing by live with more now on this latest order. Anjanette?
Yeah, we just got word of that just a few moments ago, and a lot of these tourists who are walking around here now had no idea. We're actually telling them the news that, yes, there has been a mandatory evacuation that takes effect right now at 12 o'clock for tourists only and for visitors, but some of the residents here are not taking any chances. Having survived last year's busy hurricane season, residents in Key West aren't taking any chances with this season's first.
My thought process is I've lived here 36 years, and I know it's better to be prepared than not prepared. So I would rather have things all set and ready to go.
Even if we don't get the hurricane here, we'll get enough winds and stuff that they get wet, so they want to put it along the front of their patio to keep the water from coming in.
Do they have holes in them?
Kerry Cressman is a private contractor who's stocking up on supplies for his customers who want to be prepared just in case.
Everybody calls me up at the last minute and says, hey, can you board up my house? So I plan to be doing a lot of work in the next couple of days.
Meanwhile, county officials will be meeting throughout the day, keeping a close eye on Hurricane Dennis. If an evacuation is issued, tourists will be the first to go.
For the last 7 years, the Tourist Development Council and the Keys and Emergency Management have had a very proactive and excellent relationship. We work hand in hand to help keep visitors safe, and indeed, visitor safety is a top priority.
Again, a mandatory evacuation just issued a few moments ago for tourists here, many of them not knowing this until just a few moments ago. Now, they tell us that they will not have tolls on Card Sound Road as folks make their way out of here, and on the drawbridges on Snake Creek and Qfish Creek, that will be closed as of 10 o'clock tonight. Again, a mandatory evacuation for all of the Keys right now, just for tourists. Residents at this point can just kind of sit tight and wait and see what happens as emergency management crews continue to keep an eye on Hurricane Dennis.
The hurricane warnings for the lower Keys and tropical storm warnings for the upper Keys. Now, there's the center of the storm. Now, earlier, in fact, yesterday, it was kind of moving along in a west-northwest direction and obviously has made a little change here, a subtle change to the northwest. but as it goes northwest and changes direction, obviously farther out, that makes a huge difference the farther out in time you go as to where the track is going to be. And so instead of being maybe over extreme western Cuba, the track now apparently is going to be more over central Cuba or west central Cuba. So that's going to make a big difference. Now, those of you who have friends, neighbors, relatives in Jamaica, the news there basically is good as the storm is passing to the north. The worst part of the storm is to the northeast of the center. So Jamaica more or less is spared the worst effects of this major storm on the Safford-Simpson scale. The winds are now 115 miles per hour. So it went up from 110 to 115 and crossed that threshold from 2 to 3, making it a major storm. Here is the broader view of the satellite imagery. You can see it's a nice area off to the east of the center here, all covered with rain and clouds. So some squally weather well off to the east by at least, I guess, a couple hundred miles here. The core of the storm, though, apparently only about 50 or 60 miles near the center, so relatively small core of the storm, and that's expected to move to the west-northwest and perhaps grow and change. The first outer band, you guess, would be right about there through the southeastern Bahamas, a very weak outer band. Throughout the night tonight and tomorrow, we're going to see a few showers move through, and these high-level clouds begin to increase here in South Florida. Now, let's go a little bit wider and show you the forecast path. That's where the forecast is now. By 8 o'clock on Friday morning, it's expected to be right there south of Cuba. And by 8 o'clock on Friday morning, or 8 p.m. on Friday for tomorrow night, it's expected to be very close to Havana as a Category 2 storm. Notice now it has now gone down just a little bit in intensity from a 3 to a 2. So that's because of the interaction undoubtedly with the rugged terrain over western Cuba. Then coming off the northern coast, the northwestern coast of Cuba by Saturday morning, and again intensifying back to a Category 3 storm, continuing on up into the northern Gulf of Mexico, and then perhaps coming ashore somewhere between New Orleans and
southeast of Cabo Cruz, Cuba. It's still moving towards the northwest, about 15 miles per hour, so it will indeed be passing over Cuba. The central port, the core of the hurricane passing over central Cuba tomorrow evening, and then getting very, very close to the lower Florida Keys, and that's why we put up that hurricane warning effective at 5 p.m. today.
Now, Max, the southwestern portion of Cuba appears to be first in the line of Dennis. What's the topography there like?
Well, the heaviest, the highest mountains are on the east side here, and so that's where they'll have the heaviest rainfall. But they're going to certainly feel the impacts over a large portion of Cuba. We're very, very concerned with the storm surge flooding. We think 5 to 7 feet in this portion of Cuba right here. But then the rest of this is very, very shallow. So depending on exactly where it makes landfall, near into the east or where it makes landfall there, they could have upwards of 20 feet of storm surge if indeed it strengthens to a Category 4 hurricane.
And of course, a lot of our viewers have loved ones in Havana. What might happen after it passes over the southwestern part and moves up toward Havana?
I think the core of the hurricane will indeed pass very, very near Havana, and I would expect power outages and the whole 9 yards that you typically get with any major hurricane.
Solo Miami-Dade. Broward no está incluido en ningún tipo de advertencia en estos momentos. Es solamente Miami-Dade bajo vigilancia, no aviso, vigilancia de condiciones de tormenta tropical. O sea, de que se pueda desarrollar alguna ráfaga, digamos, en exceso de las 40 millas por hora. Por el momento están viendo lo que ha sido el huracán durante el día de hoy, su intensificación durante el día, alcanzando vientos de 115 millas por hora y su trayectoria justo al norte del área de Jamaica. Esto se esperaba, recuerden, habíamos planteado una trayectoria que sería sobre Jamaica o justo cerca de la costa norte de Jamaica, así que no está lejos de lo que se esperaba. Durante el día ha tomado un giro más hacia el noroeste, pero todavía se mantiene una proyección de que lo llevaría pasando sobre Cuba, probablemente las provincias centrales de Cuba, y luego hacia el estrecho de la Florida, no lejos de los Cayos, por cierto, y de eso estaremos hablando en solo un segundo. Por el momento, si le está siguiendo el paso en un mapa de trayectoria, 19 norte y 76.6 oeste, latitud y longitud respectivamente, está como a 500 millas aproximadamente del área de Cayo Hueso, a 500 millas al sur-sureste de ahí, se mueve hacia el noroeste, 15 millas por hora, y ya mencionaron los vientos, 115 millas por hora, es un huracán de categoría 3 y la presión mínima sigue
closely. Right now we have an opportunity to talk to Max Mayfield, who's the director of the National Hurricane Center, and he joins us now live from West Miami-Dade. Max, we started the day with nothing. We end the day with a hurricane warning. A busy day, all due to that little shift, huh?
It is, and Don, this this is really important, you know, what the local stations here in Miami are doing, because you're the only media they get down there in the Florida Keys, and this is a really critical situation here in the Florida Keys. People down there in the hurricane warning area need to heed the advice of those local officials.
Okay, Max, maybe you have had a chance to look at some of the latest models that I haven't looked at yet. Are we tending to move a little bit more to the east, even as of late this afternoon?
You know, even, well, since yesterday, the tendency has been to shift a little bit more and more to the east here, ever so slowly. We also have some models that are still well out to the west of our track here, so we think we have a very reasonable track at this time. We really haven't seen any additional models since that 5 p.m. forecast was issued, but this is still going to be close enough to the lower Florida Keys that this is a real concern down there.
Okay, Max, on a perfect forecast, if the storm exactly goes on your forecast track, what will happen in Key West?
Well, if we have a perfect forecast, the big concern here is that the tropical storm force winds will likely be reaching portions of the Keys by late tomorrow afternoon. And that means that portions of US 1 will likely go underwater, which means if people have not evacuated by then, it's too late. The core of the hurricane will likely be approaching the Key West area, or at least the lower Florida Keys, very late tomorrow night. But people need to do what their local officials are telling them to do. If they're told to evacuate, they need to do so immediately.
Now, farther up to the north of Miami-Dade County, there's a tropical storm watch, and then Broward County, nothing. But should we take that line literally?
Not at all. You know, we've got some more time here. The farther north you go, we could very well, depending on the next forecast cycle here, end up with the tropical storm warning up for, you know, Miami-Dade and possibly even Broward County. We haven't ruled that out yet. And of course, we also have to deal with the Gulf Coast of the peninsula.
Latest advisory on the storm.
Dwight, 29 hours ago, it was a tropical storm. Then it was upgraded quickly to a Category 1 hurricane by 6 o'clock last night. Now here it is 11 o'clock, and there's a Category 4 hurricane out there on the Saffir-Simpson scale south of Cuba and north of Jamaica. Now look at the winds, 135 miles per hour sustained and gusting to 160 miles per hour as of the latest advisory at 11 o'clock tonight. The movement is still northwest at 15 miles per hour, so it's still chugging along pretty fast here. And it's now 440 miles to the southeast of Miami-Fort Lauderdale. There you see the coordinates if you're tracking at 19.9 and 77.6. The pressure continues to decrease, 950 millibars or 28.05 inches of mercury. So that is a very formidable Category 4 storm. As we expected to go, this track has not changed much since the 5 o'clock major advisory, and that, I guess, is good news because the last 2 or 3 tracks had been tending to the north. This one has pretty much stayed put. Takes the track right over central Cuba. All right, let's take a little closer view of it. Here's where it is right now. We're going to put it into motion for you, and there is the position by 8 o'clock tomorrow morning. It has emerged from Santiago de Cuba and now is over the province of Camagüey as of 8 o'clock Friday morning, tomorrow morning. Then the storm is expected to move a little bit closer, and now hurricane warnings are up for the province of Habana, Cuba, and much of the western areas. However, Pinal del Rio and the Isle of the Youth still under a hurricane watch. Those are the only areas of Cuba pretty much under a hurricane watch. The rest of Cuba under a hurricane warning. So that's the position by 8 o'clock tomorrow night. Now notice that's a pretty fast. Here you can see a lot of moisture wrapping around the storm now. These aren't really bands yet, but it's low-level moisture that's being thrown off by the hurricane. Now, a real close view here shows the eye of the storm moving right over Santiago de Cuba right there. This is all open water, so very little is going to happen as it goes over that little spit of land. And you can see how Jamaica generally was spared most of the wind here. Still a lot of rain coming up. It's probably 4 or 5 inches of rain there. Also, Cuba's going to be hammered with the high winds and rain, especially along the south coast. But you can see the eye of the storm, not much of a wobble to it anymore. Looks like it's pretty...
What that means.
West. So what we're going to continue to see as we follow Hurricane Dennis, this is making a great impact right now in Cuba, bringing all the rain and winds right along with it. And we're going to see as it parallels the coast, if it would have made more of that landfall in the central parts of Cuba, maybe some of the mountains would have knocked that down or just going over landfall. But now it looks like it could pass over this very small part, which wouldn't really do too much.
This will be the first time Cuba has been hit with a Category 4 hurricane in some 200 years. So This is history we're seeing in the making. This is unprecedented to see this strong of a storm this early in the season. I think it's only the 7th or 8th time that we've actually seen a Category 4 storm anywhere in the month of July since records have been kept back in the late 1800s. I'll show you the forecast track now. We'll put it on out so you can see the general direction. As of 5 o'clock this morning, the newest advisory comes out in about 2 hours, but you can see it still moves it just to the south at Key West as a Category 4 storm before making landfall, possibly weakening as it does so as the upper level environment becomes a little more unfavorable as it makes landfall, and that may save parts of the Panhandle from a disastrous hit. And again, we hope for that weakening as, again, the Panhandle has been through a rough season last year with Ivan and this year already with Tropical Storm Cindy. Here's a little closer up of the forecast track.
It is south of Cuba, moving northwesterly at 12. Its barometric pressure has dropped substantially over the last couple of hours. It is now at 938 millibars.
And of course, you see it here around Cuba, but Hurricane Dennis has its
flooding in those areas. All right, the last 24 hours, and you can see where this weather is coming from that we're now starting to experience, radiating out of the hurricane itself as the hurricane moves closer. We're going to continue to see increasing bands of this heavier weather move our way. Close up, 12 hours ago, you could see the eye located there just to the south of Cabo Cruz, the peninsula right there. And as we put it into motion here, a couple of things you'll notice. One is that the eye kind of fills a little bit and then clears out as it gets onto the northwest. Another thing is a gradual turn kind of to the left, but the last few loops you'll see a little wobble here back to the right, and it's this whole game, if you follow it too closely, of saying, oh, that's good, it's going left away from us. Oh, that's not so good, it's kind of wobbling back to the right. And the Hurricane Center kind of discourages that thinking, and they say, look at the big picture, look at what it's been done, what has happened, what the average motion has been over the past not only several hours, but many hours, 6 to 12 hours, and that's the general motion of the storm off to the northwest. So if this, in fact, is just a wobble back to the right here, that's good. We like that. If it is more of a general trend to the right here, whole moisture field around the hurricane, and if we extrapolated well, let's say here is the center of the hurricane, and here is kind of the outer edge of the hurricane. If we extrapolated that westward, just kind of ran a line as straight as possible, you would see that much of Florida is still going to be on the right side of the hurricane and feel the effects of it. So even if the center, the core, goes well to the southwest, we're still going to deal with some very significant weather from this hurricane. And the other thing you can see is right here, that little swirl there, that's that high pressure that we're thinking is going to continue to help keep it from turning due north, which would certainly be the worst case scenario. And we are
through the northeastern part of the storm right now for the first time, and that's where the strongest winds would occur. And so we'll be able to update the advisory a little bit later and bring the winds up.
All right, Ed, it's been since last year, and it seems just like months ago that we went through this here across South Florida. Tell that information that is vital to know exactly what the hurricane is doing, because otherwise we have to rely on purely satellite estimates. And with that hurricane information from the reconnaissance flights, it makes a world of difference. Right now, as we freeze this image as of 9 o'clock, you can see the eye of the hurricane very well pronounced as it continues to move off to a northwesterly fashion. The jog that Ed and I were chatting about, the storm was forecast to move north and west. Overnight, it continued northwest, made a little bit of a wobble to the west, and now appears to be making, again, that northwesterly track. And this storm will continue to wobble back and forth as it does so. And we've seen with hurricanes in the past, especially last season, with Hurricane Charlie, even with Ivan, Jean, and Francis, as a storm, especially major strong hurricanes like this, as they continue to move on their track, they will wobble back and forth as we go through what is called eye wall replacement cycles. So this storm, the closer it comes to the Keys and as it moves over Cuba, we'll have to watch these wobbles very closely. A wobble away from the Keys would be good news. A wobble to the east towards the Keys.
And it doesn't look like it's weakening at all. A recon plane went in there and said, hey, it is dropping in pressure, so that means it's getting strong.
The wires, but as you can see, take a look at this graphic. Some major changes as far as the wind speed. 135 miles per hour is what the storm was at. It is now up to 150 miles per hour. That is a very strong Category 4 storm. The gusts are now up to 185 miles per hour. A Cat 5 hurricane, which is the top of the line on the Saffir-Simpson scale, starts at 155 miles per hour. So this is only 5 shy becoming the highest level on the Saffir-Simpson scale possible. And the movement to the north and west is now back up from 10 miles per hour to 15 miles per hour. So that is showing that storm has now picked up speed. It had that little wobble late last night, early this morning, that took it a little more on a westerly track, and it also slowed it down. But the storm has now picked up its forward speed, and there is a forecast speed increase with the storm over the next 12 to 24 hours. So right now we are seeing some rather alarming things coming out of Hurricane Dennis as far as just the basic information. It is now 300 miles to the south of the Miami-Fort Lauderdale area. Is a very strong Category 4. The pressure now 938 millibars. That is down from 950 millibars as of the last advisory. The aircraft reconnaissance flight, as they fly through the storm and crisscross it and drop the drop signs in it, have found a central pressure. Again, what we were talking about, the westerly turn. Late last night, the storm took a little bit of a westerly jog. It's a wobble with that eye wall replacement cycle. We see these with major hurricanes, especially hurricanes that are this strong and this powerful. Let's take a closer look up to this, and as you can see, the eye moving just to the south around the Camagüey area of the South Cuba. Some very shallow waters in through here, very warm as well, and the eye is very well defined, very distinct. And Mark, as you and I were mentioning earlier, it looks like it's getting ready to come ashore here in the next couple of hours somewhere on the southwestern shorelines of Cuba. And this is such a strong Category 4 storm that, you know, Cuba is a very thin island country. It is very mountainous in through this region. We're talking mountaintops of probably 4,000, 4,500 feet above sea level. But again, it's moving at 15 miles per hour, so it's going to be over this island. I think weakening with a storm this powerful will be very minimal, to say the least.
Well, Trent, I was going to ask you that. Dangerous storm, and there you can see the movement northwesterly, a little wobble, and then off towards the north-northwest. But with a very strong, intensifying hurricanes, you tend to see these wobbles here. So the general motion off to the northwest does continue. And Havana on the other side of Cuba right now, looking at the winds starting to increase, but nothing near hurricane force. Here's the visible shot showing you the eye of the storm right near the center. That's where you have those winds 150 miles an hour. Out 50 miles from the center either direction, winds exceeding hurricane force, 75 miles an hour or greater sustained. Here you can see the lightning data showing you the fringe effects coming now into South Florida. Thunderstorms and squalls moving through. Torrential rain is you have orographic lifting of wind. That is when you've got the rain coming in, suddenly it's lifted up the top of the mountain. That causes condensation and causes a heavy amount of precipitation, heavier than what you might normally get. So I would imagine it's just raining maybe 3-4 inches per hour right on the side of that mountain now. In addition to that, 150-mile-an-hour winds too. So here's the eye of the storm as it's moving along.
Now watch as it moves to the northwest. Here comes the eye, and now it moves into radar range, and we can see that it went right by, that's the eye wall right there, right over Cienfuegos, and we can see the direction of movement up in this direction as we saw. But again, whether it's a little bit to the left or a little bit to the right of the center of that cone, that's going to be very, very important. Extra 50 miles this way or that way makes a tremendous difference in how strong the winds are in the lower Keys. Now here's the wide view, and we can see that it's some outer bands, let's call them outer bands, with the hurricane here that feed in like this, wrap around into the storm, and that's what's been affecting the Keys. It has been a very stormy, squally day off and on in the Keys. There you can see very clearly that band right there wraps around into the center, and that band is over the lower Keys, part of it over the lower Keys right now. I'll show you the real-time Doppler 4 in a second. But what's going to happen as the hurricane, if it continues on this track like this, and let's hope it moves by to the west of the lower Keys, and hopefully well west, but we just can't guarantee that. These are also bands out in here. There's one right there wrapping around. Here's another kind of broken one here wrapping around. So these bands off to the far east side are going to start to impact Dade and Broward. And then once the storm gets up into this area up here in the Gulf, then the stronger stuff here will be in Dade and Broward, and that's why we think that the weather will go downhill. Fuegos, I understand you have some information from there?
That's right. We've been in touch with the Meteorological Service of Cuba and indicate that there's been a gust in Cienfuegos of 149 miles per hour. So clearly we've had a landfall of a major hurricane in that area, and likely damaging winds and storm surge.
So no details on what's happened in Cienfuegos, just the fact that they've had this significant wind.
Right, that's what's been relayed to us from their weather service.
All right. We were looking just a moment ago at the radar and the satellite presentation. Even though we can see that the land interaction is affecting the storm, it still has a almost perfect shape to it overall.
That's right. While it's always had sort of an asymmetrical appearance, the inner core has been maintained over the last several hours, even as the center has come ashore. And we think there'll be some deterioration, of course, as it moves over land. It's going to take some time to cross the coast and then make its exit over the Gulf of Mexico. But still a major hurricane likely near the lower Keys.
And you're still thinking that
right now winds are 135 miles an hour. It is expected to continue moving north and west at about 17, and that will put it back over open waters. In fact,
latest information, Mr. Mayfield.
Actually, Wolf, we're not getting too much information as the reporting stations stop reporting in Cuba as they get impacted by the hurricane. It made landfall as a Category 4 hurricane. We think it's weakening now. It will likely continue to weaken some during the night. It made landfall near Cienfuegos on the south coast. It's headed towards Havana right now. Havana is right about over here. Conditions will continue to go downhill in Havana during the night. It will likely emerge off the north coast very early in the morning, and then we think it will start to re-intensify again. And that's why we put up the hurricane watch from the Steinhatchee River over to the mouth of the Pearl River. So this is on a track similar to Ivan, and this is going to have a big impact, somewhere within that watch area.
Well, let's get back to Cuba for a moment, Mr. Mayfield. Are you suggesting that Havana itself, the capital of Cuba, is going to get close to that eye of the hurricane?
Oh, absolutely. I don't see how they can miss it now. It's really at the angle that it's made, it's kind of parallel much of Cuba, and made landfall right here, and you can see the eye right there, and it's headed right for.
You see our first cell now working north of Miramar, just to the west of the Pines. The rest of Broward County is dry for now, but again, as we forecast, the weather continues to deteriorate northward. Here's the latest satellite loop coming in across Cuba. Again, the eye has been wobbling back and forth, but now you can see the infrared enhanced satellite imagery here. The red cloud claps are now warming a bit, and those are turning orange, showing a weakening storm as it continues to approach Cuba. And the visible satellite imagery here as it moves over land, you can still see a very well defined eye. Even though the storm has weakened a touch, we're still stalking a major hurricane as it continues to track ever so closely to Havana. Key West up here, that little speck right there, that's the dry Tortugas, and US 1 and mainland Monroe County here, Miami-Dade and Broward there. So let's turn it over to Don No now for a little more on the hurricane. And Don, here is the path the last 24 hours. Take us through time and show us what the storm has done and then what we anticipate the wind field to do from there.
Okay, what we're about to show you is the path of the storm over the past 24-hour period. Pay attention to the white line and how it just kind of wiggles around. This is the path over the last couple of days. Now, we put into motion, this is the past 24-hour period. It moved north of Jamaica. It moved right over Santiago de Cuba, over the little archipelago islands, very close to Cienfuegos. And you can see how the path kind of goes north, and then it goes south, and then it goes north. And we expect the next little jog to be about like that. And all the computer models are pretty much tightly clustered here in the next 12 to 24 hours that take the storm in a direction that moves it generally that way and keeps the center of the storm south of Key West. However, the storm extends out what we consider the core of the storm.
Right there where the eye is, and it's heading very close to Havana within the next 3 hours. Duck and cover in Havana. Take cover there as the system moves through. Key West, you're up here. It's almost to your same longitude. That means as far west as you are, it is probably going to pass to the west of you, and you're not going to get the strongest winds. But be prepared for the strongest winds, and it's going to get worse. You're still going to...
Vientos sostenidos en Cienfuegos, 99 millas por hora. Ráfagas en Cienfuegos, 149 millas por hora. Se reporta serios daños en la zona de Cienfuegos durante esta tarde. En estos momentos, el centro, el ojo de este huracán, al norte de la bahía de Cochinos, ya sobre la provincia de Matanzas, moviéndose hacia el noroeste a razón son de 17 millas por hora. Sus vientos máximos han disminuido a cerca de 135 millas por hora. Está lloviendo y tronando en partes del sur de la Florida. Ha empezado a entrar actividad de lluvia y tormentas eléctricas desde el sureste. Algunas tormentas ya han causado ráfagas de viento en exceso de 50 millas por hora. Esto no asociado al núcleo del huracán como tal, pero más bien, claro, a estas intensas tormentas que, repito, se mueven hacia el noroeste, y actualmente hay aviso de tormenta local severa dentro del condado Broward, como ven, porque esto, repito, se está moviendo hacia el noroeste mientras va pasando sobre el sur de la Florida. Esto, repito, no tiene que ver con el núcleo del huracán como tal. Vamos a la más reciente información del ciclón. Les voy a mostrar que está localizado a
to the south over central Cuba. It is now inland and losing some of its punch, but not for long, because in about 2 or 3 hours it'll be back out over water again. Some very warm waters of the southeastern Gulf of Mexico. And that's when the forecast gets interesting, because once it comes off the coast of Cuba, we still expect it to head toward the lower Keys, but probably to the west of the lower Keys. But how far west is going to be the big question, because the hurricane force winds extend out 50 miles from the center, actually now 60 miles from the center, and tropical storm force winds extend out about 160 miles from the center. So you can assume if it passes within 60 miles of Key West, then the core of hurricane force winds would also pass across Key West. If it passes about 160 miles away from South Florida, then we would see tropical storm force winds sustained later tonight and early tomorrow. So it could be worse, but it looks like the track will take the worst weather out into the southeastern Gulf of Mexico tonight. We will still see those squalls and some gusty winds and heavy rain bands moving in, even though the hurricane should be moving farther and farther away late tonight and tomorrow. Let's take a look at the map on what we can expect here in South Florida, because this is really what everybody wants to know. What can we expect here from Hurricane Dennis? We know it's bad. We know it's dangerous. It's still a Category 3 hurricane. But what does that mean for us? Well, we can expect heavy rain bands, which will contain winds of 50 miles an hour or more at times. And we also have to watch out for the possibility of tornadoes, the possibility of flooding, especially on some roads tonight. But the big thing here is that we expect improving weather, but not until tomorrow afternoon. So I would say there's a window of between the next 12 to 18 hours where we're going to need to just stay safe, stay indoors, and only drive if it's an absolute emergency, and especially on some of those causeways, exercise caution tonight and tomorrow. Now, the satellite review does show that we've lost the eye as far as the infrared imagery is concerned, because it is over land. So we're losing some of the eye wall there. It's probably covered with high overcast clouds, but not as strong now as it was just a couple of hours ago. But look at how close it is already to the north coast of Cuba. Once it gets in there and gets into the warmer waters of the Gulf of Mexico, it will gain strength once again for tonight. Now, here is the 7 o'clock advisory. It just came in. It's at 22.7 north, 81.4 west. The winds are now down to 125 miles an hour. So instead of it being on the high end of the Category 3, it's now getting closer and closer to Category 2 status, but still a very dangerous Category 3 hurricane. Moving off to the northwest at 15 miles an hour. It really hasn't slowed down that much. That's the reason why it'll be back over water pretty quickly here tonight. The pressure 952 millibars, and it's currently centered 130 miles southeast of Key West. Once again, that is the very latest advisory, 125-mile-an-hour winds. Now, you know, the folks at the National Hurricane Center always urge you to never focus on that skinny black line down the middle, because it hardly ever goes down the middle. But we want you to instead pay more attention to the cone, because it could really go to the right or it could go to the left.
Hands coming in here. There's one. There's a big one that came through. And
which is within 30 miles east of Havana, Cuba right now. So over the next 3 to 4 hours, it should reemerge into the Gulf of Mexico. You can see the rain bands already strafing parts of South Florida. Even the Florida Keys, sustained winds right now in the tropical storm force, 43-mile-per-hour sustained winds.
And of course, if you have
feeder band that went through, it's right now in the Gulf. There's plenty lagging behind. This is a nice big shot of all the rain. The Fort Myers area getting pounded with rainfall. The same with Naples, Broward, Miami-Dade, and there's the center of circulation. It looks like right now most of the rain shield is starting to break away from the eye or that center of circulation. But once the eye makes its way over warm waters again, there is still a chance that it could re-intensify. for the
days here in South Florida that it's just going to be an ongoing event for us. Now, this is a good picture to look at. This is the satellite and radar combined. You can see the center of the storm, the core of the hurricane right there, the center of circulation again, just right near Cuba, just off to the east and northeast of Cuba. As of the latest coordinate here, the estimate of the position, it's going to continue to move off to the north and west. Of course, Key West and the lower Keys right there. So look at all this heavy rain. And I want to point out one thing here. We were just seeing some heavy rain showers, but now look in here where we see more in the way of convection, of thunderstorms starting to wrap into these bands that will likely make their way through to the Keys before too long here, as well as heavy band of precipitation showers and thunderstorms wrapping through Broward and Miami-Dade up to Palm Beach counties. So down in Key West, Jeff Weinseer and Glenna, and they are going to be experiencing deteriorating conditions here with the system getting ever closer. Again, it has reemerged back into the Gulf. At this point, looks like the eye is almost all the way out now into the Straits, and again, a possibility of intensification certainly is there at that point.
Well, I tell you what, you mentioned our crews all up and down not only the peninsula here, but all the way down to the Keys. Let's say
Go Hurricanes. What's he talking about? This storm is doing. Of course, we're seeing the really nasty side right now as it pushes towards the northwest. These rain bands are moving in, but notice the outer bands. Those are the stormy bands, but this blob back here, this is the really soaking heavy rains, of course, always on the eastern portion of a hurricane. We're waiting for those to come through, but they've been a bit slower than we expected. We expected those to be in the area and really affecting us, but that is the next thing we're watching. Will that make it right in?
We could see here on our infrared satellite picture showing weakening, but maybe some strengthening zone. That's the big question.
This little thing down here, but what we are faced with is that one little feeder band to the north that's not really so little, but in relation to the rest of the storm, which is this lopsided mess of rain, we have an awful lot more weather potentially to move through here in South Florida. A little closer view shows the eye of the storm has emerged off the northern coast of Cuba, now becoming a little more apparent, and the painting on the satellite picture with the infrared photography showing that the eye is beginning to open up again. The maximum winds are only 100 miles per hour now near the center, but that may increase now today as the storm gets over open water. But what we have is really quite a mess. Here's the radar picture, the eye of the storm right about there. And you can see the rotation very, very fast right around the eye. But what we have rotating through the lower Keys is a lot of heavy rain. But this band, this red thing up there, that's really what we have here in South Florida. Let's take a look, starting with Broward County. And this is the hurricane center, and there's some very, very heavy rain right through there, and these bands are kind of spiraling around and rotating around the center and may brush Key West with some very bad weather in just a few minutes. But let me go up to Broward County now and show you this band of rain. It has now moved into Broward from Hollywood over to Western through Pembroke Pines north of Miramar. And this is the heavy band of rain, lightning, and winds, which are undoubtedly at least 40 miles per hour and could be as high as 60 miles per hour. This band is moving to the north. So those of you in the northern part of Broward County still up and watching us, you're going to get this thing as it comes through in the next half hour or so as it's moving fairly rapidly. I want to go down into Miami-Dade County.
We've seen now that the eye has reformed. And this tells us that the core of the hurricane is intact. It was undisturbed by the land. The hurricane went through a weakening phase, but this inner core here has remained remarkably intact, has been disrupted very little, and it's got all the ingredients now.
Of 145 miles an hour near the southern coast of Cuba, but is still a dangerous hurricane, which is not that far off the Florida west coast. So everybody to the right of there is under the gun as far as the possibility for rotating winds and heavy to severe showers and thunderstorms. Hurricane Dennis, the forecast track hasn't really changed much. We still think it'll wind up somewhere along the northern Gulf Coast, during the afternoon tomorrow, possibly as a major hurricane of Category 3. Right now it's a Category 2, and it is
lifting on off to the north and west. And also notice all the reds now along the core of the hurricane, the center of circulation in through about there. So we're getting a lot of solid convection here around the center, cold cloud tops, and that's showing the storm is re-intensifying. We're also seeing more of those cold cloud tops just here around the Key West area, and we're seeing plenty of showers and thunderstorms as well. Okay, on the radar now, let's talk about this cell right in through here in Miami-Dade County. That's the one that prompted the tornado warning for parts of the upper Keys. We'll put the sweep mode on and let's take you into that cell. Again, this tornado warning for the upper Keys was prompted by this cell here as it continues to push off to the north and west at some 45 miles per hour. And it's doing so again very, very quickly. It's pushed past the Richmond Heights area. Now we're watching another cell training behind that from Cutler Ridge, stretching down basically towards the Homestead Air Force Base. And if we go a touch further down through the storm,
right here is the center of circulation, but there are plenty of bands still to come. These feeder bands are wrapping all the moisture from the Caribbean and the Atlantic, bringing it all over South Florida, and ultimately it'll end up right in the center of circulation. Right over Miami-Dade and Broward counties right now, mostly dry except for some activity in extreme southern Miami-Dade County. Here are some of the bands that came through.
Further, I'm afraid. So right now it is a Category 2 hurricane. Top winds are 100 miles an hour. Sky Tracker shows us the rainfall now. Tornado watch up in Tampa and Orlando. Note that band of rain way up there by Crystal River. Right now things are okay around Panama City where Mike is, and also out there where Jim is in the Pensacola Beach area, but that rain's starting to fill in. So around Apalachicola, here comes that rain.
Center there in the form of an eye, and that is well offshore, not currently affecting the Florida coastline with that direct strong wind, but there's still some bands coming into Key West and heavy rain coming over South Florida Peninsula. Here's the circulation here, and the reason we're seeing some of the surge on the video that we've seen is because the wind is out of the south here. Up here in the Naples and Fort Myers area, the wind is actually offshore, and that's not causing the surge to be that great. So the next 12 hours, this is what we expect along the coast, locally up to 5 feet in Key West.
Torrential rainfall. There's the eye, and still plenty of moisture coming in from Cuba and wrapping itself around the eye, still impacting the lower Florida Keys. You can clearly see that shield of rain. It's almost as if there was a line from the 7 Mile Bridge all the way down. That's where most of the rainfall is. Marathon pretty dry. Same with Isla Mirada, but the rain continues for you in Key West. I'll have a
imagery early this morning, but boom, over the last 6 hours, the satellite imagery has really drastically changed. As of 6 o'clock, the latest images coming in, a very well-defined eye. And from an hour, from 5 o'clock to 6 o'clock, the National Hurricane Center, the aircraft reconnaissance flight, indicated the pressure in the center of Dennis dropped 11 millibars. That's a very rapid drop in pressure, showing a storm that is significantly and rapidly intensifying. So this is now back to a major hurricane, a Category 3 on the Stafford-Simpson scale with winds of 115 miles per hour. Here's a radar satellite composite. Again, a very well-defined eye pushing off to the north and west. And for us, back behind this, rain bands continuing to wrap around. Most of those, the heavier ones into the Keys now. But for Miami-Dade and Broward, we have this persistent light to moderate rain band continuing to come through, and a couple
making a move towards Pensacola. It could intensify tonight. The latest advisory saying that right now, Category 3, 125 mile per hour winds. Things should start to die down for Miami-Dade and Broward County overnight. I still expect cloudy skies this evening and tomorrow with some squally weather, and it will be breezy and windy, especially in the afternoon. For the Keys, your rain will continue tonight and will come to an
center. The 11 p.m. Eastern advisory. The center of Dennis placed 250 miles south of Panama City. Top winds 125 miles an hour, so it's still a strong Category 3 on the Saffir-Simpson scale. It's moving off to the northwest. It's been varying between about 13 and 14 miles an hour here during the past 6 to 12 hours. Central pressure 941 millibars as measured by Hurricane Hunter aircraft of the 53rd Weather Reconnaissance Squadron. And the eye is very small, only about 10 miles across. And a very, very well-defined, look at this thing just sitting out there, almost a perfect circle. And that's one way you can tell that the storm really has itself organized is when it is that perfect circle. It's not elliptical, it's not getting blown apart by upper-level winds. There's very little upper-level wind shear here. And that, from a storm standpoint, is good news. From our standpoint, not particularly good news because upper-level wind shear would help to disrupt the flow. That is not happening. So it doesn't look like this thing really has a lot to weaken it here in the about anywhere from 12 to 24 hours between now and when it makes landfall, it looks like. Let's get a little closer in view here, and boy, just look at this donut of purples and reds. Those are the highest cloud tops, the eye wall, a ring of thunderstorms that can extend 50 to 60,000 feet up in the atmosphere. That's 10 to 12 miles. And just think of it as the armor around that eye, and you're looking right down into that eye. You break out into that eye, you look down, and you can see the sea surface. And just in the space of a few miles, you're going from winds of 125 miles an hour. 3 miles later, the winds are dead calm. Now, this is a very compact storm in terms of the hurricane force winds. Look here, some of the buoys just...
System brewing in the tropics that we do have to keep an eye on, don't we, Megan?
Yeah, we're just going to keep an eye on it for now, but really focusing still on Dennis tonight. And we'll show you briefly the tropical wave that is well off to our east. Right now, you are looking at still a Category 3 storm here in Dennis, but look at how it has been organizing over the course of the last 4 or 5 hours here. Deep convection around the center of circulation, and the eye is very well defined. However, small, just about 10 miles wide. This is not a large eye for the storm, but as it continues to push off to the north and west, the system will continue to organize and is likely to become perhaps a Category 4 storm. You can still see some convection that we're working with, showers and thunderstorms pushing their way through South Florida. Most of it, though, remains from the lower Keys up through portions of westernmost South Florida at this point. This is the latest information. Category 3 Hurricane Dennis. This is as of the latest information, again, coming in at 11 p.m. about there as it continues to push off to the north and west. So we're starting to lose a good look at the eye here. You can still see that it is still rather small. You can still see the center of circulation, but as it continues to move farther away, we'll likely not be able to see it quite as well here, maybe picking it up from some of the radar sites off to our north and west. But we're still seeing some showers and some heavy thunderstorms wrapping around the Keys right now, even up into portions of Palm Beach County. Broward and Miami-Dade, a nice swath of rain here, likely some...
54 millas por hora en Miami Beach, Kendall 64 y Homestead 67 millas por hora fueron las ráfagas máximas que se sintieron anoche y esta mañana. Y como ven, en el condado Broward no fue tan...
So we told you about Dennis. We've been talking about that. Lori told you we're also watching a wave here, and let's take you over to that. It is something that we don't really want to think about quite yet, folks, but there is a wave coming off Africa right now. It's about 1,450 miles to the east of the Lesser Antilles. Possibility of some development.
Thinking about developing, something we'll be watching here for the next...
And even some thunderstorms developing with some of these bands. As we explained earlier, the center of circulation is right about here, but it's going to drag all these showers and thunderstorms with it, maybe meaning another 1 to 3 inches for us here in South Florida. And look at some of these thunderstorms developing right along coastal areas of northern Miami-Dade up through Broward and into Palm Beach counties, as well as down into the lower Keys. We're dealing with thunderstorms there and a pretty good swath of rain, although into the upper Keys right now, they may be getting a brief break from the steady precipitation. It may be breaking up just a tad around the middle Keys and into the upper Keys as of now. But again, Key West has been hit by rain. It's been going. The system is becoming. Earlier today, it dropped 11 millibars in a matter of about an hour and a half. So it strengthened very rapidly earlier today between about 6 and 7 o'clock. And it's going to continue to intensify, possibly becoming a Category 4 storm before making landfall.
The very latest now on what is a Category 4 hurricane. Yes, 4. This is Hurricane Dennis with 135-mile-an-hour winds. The movement is still to the northwest at 14. The pressure now has dropped to 937 millibars. There's a look at this monster of a storm as it makes its way across the Gulf of Mexico. Look at that eye on this storm. Just amazing pictures coming out of space here.
And that's in the eye wall of the hurricane, and we can see it on our radar imagery here. There's the eye. The eye wall is this little bright red cone around here. Right now we don't see the southeastern side of it. It may be too far from the radar or may be missing. But that is the strong wind zone right in there, and where that center hits the coastline is going to produce very devastating winds. And right now we think the best estimate, it's taken a jog toward the north-northwest, and the reconnaissance has confirmed that, where it's moving 3 times farther north than it is west right now. But we expect it to take a little bend back. So the most threatened areas now are eastern Mobile, Pensacola, and over to just on the west side of Destin. That's where these strong wind cores are likely to be over the next about 8 hours or so, 6 to 8 hours. But keep in mind, there's going to be a widespread area that's going to have a lot of impact.
Where the storm has come from.
And better for Mobile right now. It looks like it's going to be hard to get this eastern eye wall where it's pushing the water on shore up into Mobile Bay right now, unless it takes a very hard jog to the west-northwest. Right now, that's not doing that, but it could push a little bit farther over, so the greater Pensacola area and just to the east looks like they may get the worst of it, but monitor this carefully. You should be prepared for the worst.
Of northerly components, and then that will mean that the storm, the northeastern quadrant, the heaviest, the dirtiest side, would make landfall right on the Panama City area, the Pensacola area, right in the northern parts of our panhandle. You can see pretty strong system right here. We keep talking about the eye, a well-defined eye. We also keep talking about the yellow and the orange are the bands. Those are the strong bands. But right around the eye wall, you see those reds. That means this is a strong system. It hasn't been losing energy. Wind shear has not been breaking it up. And the fuel that is caused from the warm waters still continues to send up that latent heat and develop this storm into a strong storm. So we don't expect a lot of de-intensification, if you will. Another look at the storm, but if we go ahead, I wanted to show you severe weather for all of the panhandle, for Alabama, Georgia, and all the way down into our area through Orlando, through Tampa Bay, and almost stopping right before Punta Gorda. But now, before we get into our local weather, because of course we are being affected by this local weather, we wanted to go ahead and talk to the Weather Channel's Jim Cantori, and I do believe Jim Cantori is right along the Gulf Coast, and you can set the stage for us. What is happening where you are?
Yeah, JC, we're about 1 mile inland from Pensacola Beach, which is where we were yesterday, okay? The good news is we're 23 feet above sea level here at the Gulf Breeze Hospital here in Florida. So we're still on this side, but, you know, I mean, we're talking about a 930 millibar pressure. This is the lowest the pressure's ever been with this thing. It's been a Cat 4 twice now, and certainly looks like it's not going to weaken any before it makes its way on shore. So we've got Ivan here in the Panhandle, and then some. You guys dealt with the worst blow out of this hurricane than you have with the past 4, it sounds like, down there in Miami, and certainly it looks like we are going to get whacked in through here. The only difference is this may start going a little bit farther west as opposed to northeast like Ivan did. So people in northwest Escambia County, people in southern Mississippi, southwestern parts of Alabama are just going to see a tremendous amount of tree damage there, much like they did across the state of Florida when Charlie came ashore. As you know, that core takes a long time to wind down, especially with a strong Category 4 hurricane. Everybody is safe, everybody is out of harm's way, and anyone that I've talked to, all right, that's gone through Ivan is not even thinking about staying for Dennis, and you know what? It's a good thing they didn't.
I know they learned their lesson well with Ivan, and of course everybody's taking this storm season very seriously, Jim. But I want to ask you to kind of tie it into our South Florida viewers. When you look on the satellite, that storm, the best thing we can compare it to is Andrew. Do you remember Andrew when it was in the Atlantic and moving onshore, and you saw that picture? It's just such a well-defined eye, such a large storm. That's kind of what we remember. When you talk about destruction when this makes landfall, can we compare it to Andrew?
Well, you know, Andrew, I think, quite frankly, was in a class by itself. Mm-hmm. I think you can compare this to a Hugo that came into Charleston, South Carolina. The eye is much, much smaller. Actually, it's about half the size as Andrew was, as is the worst part of this hurricane that came in toward Homestead. So you're talking about, you know, half of that severe damage swath, I think, with this particular storm. But, you know, if you just look at the huge cloud structure, you're absolutely right. I mean, when something takes...
Currently, this storm is now moving north at 16, still a Category 4 hurricane, packing winds at 145 miles per hour. That's the maximum sustained winds. And what that means, it's the average over a 1-minute period of winds.
And once again, that's a reference to Pensacola. On the beach in Pensacola Beach, we have Jim Cantori.
To waters get a little bit cooler as you get towards the coastline. So we're thinking maybe as it moves over those waters, instead of having this strong movement to the north, there may be a little push towards the northwest. That's the best case scenario for the panhandle, so that you would have the storm making landfall right around here between Mississippi and Alabama, as opposed to maybe right here heading straight on the same, pretty much the same path as Ivan at this point. Right now we do have a strong Category 4 storm. You see a very well-defined eye. I like like to show that satellite just so you can see how strong and defined that eye is. It's really organized. It's packing a huge punch right around the eye wall. That's where you start to see these systems wrap around themselves. So you're starting to see the showers and the thunderstorms wrap. They get stronger and stronger, and it spans out further and further along with this system as it does so. And that's why you see that Dennis is still affecting us in South Florida, and still the movement as it moves to the north, you're still getting showers over Cuba. We'll get to that in 1 second. Right now, north at 15 miles an hour. So we do expect this to make a landfall later on this afternoon after the 5 o'clock hour. Winds are at 145 miles an hour. That is a strong Category 4 storm, and it spreads very far. You're going to see tropical storm force winds 240 miles out from this storm. Also, 50 miles out, hurricane force winds. So this is definitely going to affect all areas that sit along the southeastern Gulf as it makes its way onshore. 110 miles right now south-southwest of Panama City. We continue to talk about the hurricane warnings that are in effect. These are the areas that are most concerned. They're evacuated. They're moving on because right around here, no matter who gets hit, no matter if we hit here or if we hit here, these areas will experience the outer bands of Hurricane Dennis, and this means we have rainfall totals 10 to 15 inches. We have storm surges. Once it hits land, storm surges could be 10 to 15 feet above normal. Maybe areas near right around, I'm just thinking, right around the Steenahatchee River areas around here, maybe.
Right there. It is around 80 miles south-southeast of Pensacola. And again, our next advisory comes out at 1 o'clock, and that'll show us exactly where the storm is. It's moving north-northwest right now. And as you can see right here, that is our first band that is going to contain 74-mile-per-hour winds. Hurricane force winds. So it's just
now what you're seeing at the top are wind estimations inland from the hurricane. Hurricane now indicated at about 47 miles south-southeast of Pensacola Beach, Florida, a little further away from Pensacola, and it is moving north.
But it looks very good for Biloxi. It looks like the circulation center is going to move well to the east of you. Not that you're not going to have some impacts in the form of heavy rain and some minor water rises and some blustery weather, and possibility of power outages, but you're out of it. Mobile, you're looking better. It looks like Pensacola and Fort Walton Beach are under the sights of this hurricane right now. And as you go off to Panama City, it looks like it's very difficult for the eye to hit you, and the strongest winds, which are in this core of purple right in here, right there, those are the winds. And the strong winds are going to start to come on shore near Fort Walton Beach and and Pensacola within the next hour, and then the eye will come on shore within about 3 hours. Apalachicola, you've missed it, but you've got some surge of about 6 feet over there. Coastal flooding possible there. Now here's a close-up of the radar, and you can see it basically moving just up toward Pensacola, maybe just to the east of Pensacola. And of course, Fort Walton Beach is in here. Here's Destin over here. The core of strong winds in this tiny little donut right there. That's the eye wall, and that's where the very intense winds are that are going to produce all the damage. Here's Mobile over here. Here's Biloxi well off to the west, and here's Panama City and Apalachicola. Now, the circulation has some very strong winds down here, but those strong winds in the form of tropical storm winds, gusting to hurricane force winds in the rain. The real core of destructive winds is in that donut, heading to the greater Pensacola area, Fort Walton Beach area the next 3 to 6 hours. That's the time frame on the disaster. Let's look at the water rises along the coast. I just mentioned 6 feet here in Apalachicola being reported. Panama City 5 feet and rising. We're going to see some significant rises in the right front quadrant there. 14 to 18 feet is possible. On the other side, where the winds are offshore, not much of a problem there.
All eye that you see there on radar. Janice Dean is standing by at the Fox Weather Center up in New York, where she's been tracking the storm. Janice, what can you tell us?
All right, Brian. Well, let's just to reiterate what you and Orlando have been talking about. This storm is 135-mile-per-hour sustained winds, 18 miles per hour moving to the north-northwest. It's around 55 miles south-southeast of Pensacola, Florida. We think in the next 2 hours it will be making landfall around Pensacola, perhaps Fort Walton, perhaps Destin. Here is how intense this storm is. We have hurricane force winds. Once this storm makes landfall, hurricane force winds.
Within that,
could be a tornado problem coming toward Pensacola. Typically, the tornado threats are over in the outer rain bands, keeping an eye on the area for
increase. Here's the way it looks from the radar. You can see the eye of the hurricane as it approaches the coast, and landfall expected just a half hour from now, sometime between 2 and 3 o'clock Central Daylight Time. A tornado watch remains in effect, this one, until 3 o'clock or 2 o'clock this afternoon Central Daylight Time.
On shore again, you can see that landfall now is imminent.
As you look at that satellite picture, that's the visible satellite imagery with the center circulation that you see on this graphic nearing the shore. Just 19 miles the center of circulation is from Pensacola Beach, Florida. Tornado watch in effect. That has been expanded northward through Georgia and also in Alabama through very late tonight. Probably will be expanded from there.
And around the Pensacola.
could mean that places like Pensacola over to Fort Walton Beach could have a tornado threat. That's a little unusual for hurricanes. They're usually more in these outer rain bands, like the one that's over around the Tallahassee area.
So it looks like landfall is going to be the eye itself, which would be the official landfall, probably within the next 20 minutes, but already the eye wall or hurricane force winds are already in this area from Destin, Fort Walton, all the way over in through Pensacola. So it looks like the city of Pensacola will be just west of the actual eye wall. Again, this whole area, it's about 40 or so miles in diameter. This is the area of the strongest winds in excess of 120, 125 miles an hour. It looks like from the National Hurricane Center, and I apologize for reading this to you, we just got this in, it is now officially a Category 3 hurricane. So Max Mayfield was correct. It's slowly weakened from a Category 4 right to a very high Category 3. It's about 20 miles, the center of it, east-southeast of Pensacola, Florida. And the hurricane force winds, like we were talking about, extend out about 40 miles. So right here is the target zone, just west of Fort Walton, just east of Pensacola, right along this very small strip. Santa Rosa Island, if you're familiar with that area, right in this general vicinity. Also, we want to
land. It is now Category 3. Category 3, sustained winds 120 miles per hour. The outer eye wall approaching landfall now between Pensacola and Fort Walton Beach. The outer eye wall approaching landfall between Pensacola and Fort Walton Beach. It is now down to 120 mile per hour sustained winds, Category 3, making landfall at this hour.
All right, let's go now to an area that is in the direct path of this very wide.
It's like Navarre, Fort Walton Beach, Pensacola. These areas are really in severe danger coming in here as we see some of these wind gusts picking up, and they are approaching hurricane force winds.
Now we have live coverage all along the Gulf Coast. We're going to take you first, I believe, to Jim Cantori at Pensacola, Florida. Well, here they are, all of them lined up. Mike Bettis, Mike Seidel, Jim Cantori, and Jeff Morrow. And you see where they are, too, getting hammered in Gulf breeze right now. Let's start with Jim Cantori. Jim, we can see what conditions are like. How are you faring, and how is everyone else faring?
Well, the whole team's doing pretty good, Marshall. Whole hurricane, that's because we're into the eye wall. Winds gusting 65, 75 miles an hour. You can see the trees swaying in the background. Some of these tin roofs here, this one's holding up pretty well, but things like gutters and whatnot are going to get ripped away with winds that strong. We go around, we're in the front, by the way, we're on the north side of the building, and with the winds coming out of the north now, Marshall, what's happening is we're being protected where I'm standing. That's why we're kind of panning off so we can show you just how strong those winds are once you get out into harm's way. There's a lot of debris flying around there, occasionally a tree limb and a tree coming on down. Boy, we get some big gusts in through here. We're talking about winds easily over 75 miles an hour. Now, power is out in many of the areas down and through here, and we think because the winds are the center is actually going to go just to our east. And interestingly enough, guys, there's a little place to our east called Opal Beach, which is where Hurricane Opal came over back in 1995. So over us.
I don't know if you can see it. I'm not sure where on the bay you guys are here, but certainly you're on the leading edge of some of the worst of the weather. Anderson.
Well, that's about what we expected, that we were right about in that leading edge of the eye wall. How long do you expect these kind of conditions to last, Jackie?
Dave, can we put a storm tracker on there? We're going to put a storm track on that, and as it's moving to the north, it's been moving about 17 miles per hour, so that's pretty quickly. Actually, some good news. You guys are just to the west of it, so unfortunately, I think you're probably going to be staying in this for quite some time. 18 minutes for the center if it continues on its track, but if it pulls a little bit farther up to the north, you guys, you're going to stay just right on the left side of the storm, and that's going to keep you in some pretty nasty conditions. Not the worst of the storm, but certainly very bad conditions throughout the next couple of hours, actually.
All right, well, I guess that's what we should have expected. Jackie, thanks. It's really picking up, and we haven't seen, though, a lot of debris. A lot of the trees were already broken from Ivan, so they didn't really, I guess, have much left to break, but they seem to be holding at this point. And we got a report that in Pensacola, there has not been a great amount of storm surge. No, and again, that's because of if we're on the west side of of the eye wall, the winds are going to be kicking the water offshore as opposed to onshore on the right side where Rick Sanchez and them are. But quite clearly, we're right on the edge of the eye wall on that left side of it, so it's going to be bad enough, as Jackie said.
And as you said, it's actually getting very cold. I don't know if that's just because I'm wet, but it's starting to get chilly.
And I know they can't see it, but, and pressure readings as they drop are significant in a hurricane, and it was over 29 inches 15 minutes ago. It's down, and Jackie can tell the significance of this, 28.85, so it keeps dropping. And
if Jackie Jarvis is still available, Jackie, what is the significance of that? Well, that means you're getting closer to the center of the storm, actually. Yeah, the pressure is going to continue to lower.
Santa Rosa Island, as he said, sort of midway between Pensacola Beach and Navarre Beach. But the eye wall itself is certainly going right across Pensacola Bay and will indeed move over Pensacola. There's a little bit of good news here. It's weakened slightly. I don't want to overemphasize that. It's still a Category 3 hurricane. And the really strong winds are in that very, very small area there, that eye wall, the donut around the eye there. So the extensive damage should be limited to a relatively small piece of real estate.
And this is almost very close to what Ivan, not only the strength of Ivan, but the area that Ivan made landfall, correct?
That's right. Now this eye wall has been smaller, so I don't think the storm surge will be as extensive as we had. That we will have, significant storm surge flooding from where the eye crosses the coast, all the way out here, Panama City, Apalachicola, St. George Island, Appalachia Bay, easily 4 to 6 feet over most of that area.
And these winds, Max, are really not going to die down soon for the folks north, up in Meridian, Mississippi, northern Alabama. I mean, again, even though the storm weakened just a slight bit, this is still a very large storm.
It's a large storm, but those really strong winds, and again, I really want to emphasize seeing that that's in a very, very small area. Those winds are going to die down very, very quickly once it moves over land. But you don't have to have, and we keep relearning this lesson from Isabel, from Opal, from Ivan, you don't have to have hurricane-force winds to do a lot of damage. So even this yellow swath that you see here, those are winds up to 60 miles per hour or so. Much of the Florida Panhandle, southwestern Alabama, and even into portions of eastern Mississippi here before it's all over. I would expect a lot of trees down and power outages in that area.
Hey, Max, did we dodge a little bit of a bullet just past high tide there in Pensacola, or was that just not significant at all?
Well, the tide's not all that great, over most of the Gulf Coast anyway, but in this case, every foot or two helps, so yes, it did.
Hey, Max, I know you got to run. Do you have an official time on landfall, or is it still holding off just a tad bit?
Well, this is a tad academic at this stage since what the working part of the hurricane is already hitting, but it looks like, we're just minutes away, probably another, 5 or 10 minutes, and the absolute center by definition of the eye will move over Santa Rosa Island.
And Max, to wrap it up here, again, your staff never deviated from this path. Why were you guys so confident on this path?
Well, we've, to tell you the honest truth, we're never totally confident there. We look at 10 or 12 different computer projections, and those models can do a little windshield wiper effect on us there. We've learned that's not a good thing to do to the marine community or the emergency managers, and we really tried to hold it steady, and make very, very small changes, and in this case, that served us well.
All right, hats off to you and your staff. Thank you, Max Mayfield, the director of the National Hurricane Center. So as Max was saying, again, making landfall as a Category 3 right here just east of Pensacola with sort of intensity, with winds right around 120 miles an hour. It's a strong Category 3 storm. You can see the counterclockwise circulation right around that eye, just making landfall right along that little strip there just east of Pensacola. This is the area of most intense powerful winds, 70 miles an hour plus in a very wide area, as well as some flood.
Cleanup stories about Ivan for a couple of days and you go home. Well, we came back here 10 months later. You go to Pensacola Beach, where the eye wall came ashore 10 months ago with Ivan, and you wouldn't believe how easy it is to find damage still from Ivan. There are entire hotels that have not reopened. There are buildings that have been destroyed that still lie in piles of rubble right there on the coastline that could be turned into missiles now that Dennis is coming on shore. But it's amazing how badly this area has been struggling. We've spoken to people at the shelter here who lost everything in Ivan, and they're staying here because they have nowhere to go. We saw an interview with a woman who'd been living in a tent for the last 10 months, and here they are getting it again. There are a lot of vulnerable buildings here in Pensacola that could be really picked apart because there's places for the wind to get into and blow roofs off and take out glass and windows.
And we want to let our viewers know that they are looking at the eye of Hurricane Dennis. This is the eye wall, the front eye wall that WSVN's Dave Cartoonan is standing in. Dave, you are right. This is a very deceptive storm because just in the 2 minutes that I've been watching you, it ramps up again. It looked like you were almost knocked over a moment ago.
Yeah, the gusts get tremendously powerful. The sustained winds, Category 3, of course, that, as we've said, what the forecasters have said, 120 miles an hour, but those are sustained winds. That's the average over the course of 60 seconds. So that could be 80 miles an hour 1 second and 150 miles an hour the next second, and that averages out over the course of a minute to 120 miles an hour, and that's how you get your Category 3 rating. But that doesn't mean we're not experiencing things much more powerful, like, say, right now, than 120 miles an hour.
Wow, Dave, hold on. Stay safe. Dave Cartoonan reporting from WSVN for us from the front eye wall of the storm.
Doing a terrific job. It's very difficult conditions out there. We're going to continue to check back with Dave. Now, in the meantime, we have watched the Pensacola area take a pounding as the story moves on shore, but Florida says it is prepared to handle this already vicious storm season. On the telephone now to tell us how Florida is dealing with Dennis is Florida Democratic Senator Bill Nelson. Senator, thanks for taking a few moments. Just how prepared is your state?
The state of Florida is prepared as it can be. Unfortunately, we have too much experience, having gone through 4 of these within a 6-week
of the coastline right now. The good news is we're starting to see the rain start to let up as you head towards the coast and back off the Gulf of Mexico. So coastal residents who have battened down for this storm, looks like your rain should be ending, but the wind...
Roll through of what happened here with Dennis. Okay. All right. It's gone downhill here pretty dramatically, I'd say, in the last half hour, 45 minutes. We're getting pretty consistent gusts here, at least in the 50-mile-an-hour range, if not a little bit higher. We're a little bit sheltered like Jim is. Here comes a pretty good gust. You can see the trees behind me and the wind and the rain whipping by here. As Jim was mentioning, the wind now starting to come around a little bit to the north, an indication that it does look like the center or the eye of this hurricane may pass by just to our east. Whoa! 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 Sometimes it rains so hard. Here comes another big gust. I'm going to hold on to the lamppost here to make sure I can keep my balance. But again, sometimes it rains so hard like it is now that it's hard to even see anything coming in that wind, and that really is the big danger here. Again, as this hurricane comes on shore, folks, I know it may be kind of difficult for me to say, but you should stay off the streets. You should not be out here doing this or walking around. You should be inside. You should be in shelters. We're just showing you how bad it is out here at the present time, and we're doing our best to keep ourselves safe here. It's
Gambia and Santa Rosa County here in Florida through 4:30 local time. That is because the eye wall is coming through you right now. A huge risk for severe weather. Again, tornadoes common.
Out there in Pensacola, Patrick.
Well, the eye of the storm passed about an hour ago, and we lost power at 2:30 Central Time. But we are on backup power, and we can be on backup power for hours. But we've got 2,000, staff, visitors, employees here, 300 patients, and interestingly enough, we've got 51 expectant moms. So people who are expecting came to the hospital. So we're taking care of those as well. And winds, but we are handling it, and we're just here for the community.
Right. I was going to say 51 expectant moms. It sounds like there might have been a baby boom back during the Hurricane Ivan times.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, at least they're safe and sound in your hospital, so you don't expect any problems as far as you're prepared for this. You've got all your emergency operations in place, and you can continue to operate no matter.
Yes, absolutely. And as I agree with the governor, we really need electricity, and that's the big thing. And, but we moved all of our patients into the central core of the hospital, and everybody is safe. So we're just glad that it's moving over us. We're just thrilled.
I'm sure you are. So much of the anticipation is the bad part. It's nice to see it's just getting in and moving on and doing whatever damage it's doing. Once you go to all generator power, how long, Patrick, could you operate on that if you had to do that?
60 hours.
But that's not too long.
Yeah. That's so we've got 60 hours where we can operate alone. So it's a fair amount of time, but we we expect to get help. We've been talking to the EOC from the state and the county, and so they'll be here with water, ice, fuel, staff, everything. So as soon as this passes, we will be getting all that kind of help. But it's symbolic. I'm sitting in my office, and I've got about 20 garbage cans of collecting water, so I'm not sure how symbolic that is.
Well, Patrick, what about from Ivan last year? Did you go?
We've been following this hurricane for the last few days, and like you've just learned, it did hit and make landfall very close to Pensacola. This is the track for about the last 6 hours, coming onshore right around 3 o'clock this afternoon with Category 3-4 storm winds of 120 to 125 miles per hour. This is a great radar image that shows the eye. There it is, slamming into Pensacola. Still plenty of rainfall on the backside. This has now been downgraded to a Category 2 hurricane. Now that it's over land, it should start a slow weakening process, but boy, what an afternoon it has been for the Florida Panhandle. Another great shot. Here is the eye of the storm coming right over Pensacola with 125-mile-per-hour winds. There are still plenty of storms on the north side of the eye wall right there, but something curious to note, right now the backside of the storm has a lot of dry air coming in, so once the eye goes over, the winds will start shifting coming out of the south, much weaker at about 100 miles per hour, but very, very little rain. Here's the dry side coming in. You can see it clearly right there on your monitor. Plenty of dry air, so this should start to dry out, but the strong winds will finally pick up in about the next 5 to 10 to 20 minutes as the eye continues its trek towards the north. Still some small feeder bands coming in over South Florida, weakening out. I think for us, we should start drying out overnight and in through tomorrow. But take a look at this, a wide view of the Atlantic. We are looking at two small waves. The first one here right in the center of the Atlantic. Conditions are very favorable for this to become a depression either tonight or tomorrow morning. And we're not even into Cape Verde season yet, and we've got another huge wave coming out of the western coast of Africa that we'll have to monitor very closely for possible development. These are two good systems that could develop either tonight or tomorrow. Now,
see some clearing, some blue skies. Again, we're still dealing with gusty winds that can still bring down power lines, bring down trees, and I'm pretty sure a lot of power lines still laying on the ground, so still a very dangerous
here. Solid bright eye, lots of dark blues all around the eye. Now watch as it went on up toward the coast, and you can see here that the eye is much less distinct here. The shape of it is more ragged. There's kind of a gap in over there. That's just the cool water and maybe some dry air working on it. There's the path just to the east of Pensacola was the final landfall point. Here are the numbers as of the 6 o'clock update on location, 31-1, 87-4. Winds as of 5 o'clock were still 105, moving north fast at 21. You see the pressure at 950, 10 miles from Atmore in Alabama. Atmore is just over the Alabama line north of Pensacola. So the storm is going to continue to move pretty good up through Alabama and Mississippi, and then the remnants will slow down and sit in the Ohio Valley for a few days. So there is some potential for significant flooding there. Watch this now. Watch as it goes over the last day, and watch the little zigs and zags it makes. Here it comes, here it comes. Look at that. It zigged to the right, then it went north, it zigged to the left, and then it ended up just to the east of Pensacola. Have to mention one more thing. There is a pretty good system out there that looks like it's going to be the next tropical depression. Could be as soon as tonight when that becomes TD.
Because we have an
earlier today, and now we have a brand new tropical depression number 5. It is moving towards the west at 12 miles an hour, winds 30 miles an hour. Now a good ways, about 1,200 miles from the Lesser Antilles. And let's take a look at it on satellite now. You can see that it's way out here in the central Atlantic, a long, long way from the Lesser Antilles. And so we've got a lot of time to figure that out. But again, it's a new thing to watch. And then behind that, there is a tropical wave now just coming off of Africa. So it looks like it continues to be fairly active here across the Atlantic basin. All right, here's what's going on with our tropical storm as it continues to lift northward towards the north-northwest at about 21 miles an hour, still producing winds of 50 miles an hour. The wind threat is coming down. We haven't seen a whole lot of tornado warnings. The huge concern is going to be the very, very heavy rain in the next few hours here and really for the next couple of days. There's our storm making landfall at 2:30 Central Time between Pensacola and Navarre Beach, and boy, did we see some wind when this thing came on board. 121 miles an hour at Navarre Beach, 59 miles an hour Meridian, Mississippi. Mobile checking in with 48 on the weak side of the storm, and Atlanta gusting to 37 miles an hour, and you are still gusting to 37 in Atlanta. And now
this storm is 2,740 miles to the east-southeast of Miami. Winds right now are 30 miles per hour, gusting up to 40. And the movement is west right now at 10 miles per hour, pressure at 1,010 millibars. So to give you an idea of what we're talking about, there is Dennis. Here is tropical depression number 5. Miami is right in through there. And this storm is again forecast to move off to the west. And judging by the satellite images we're getting tonight, wouldn't surprise me if this was the 5th named storm of the season, upgraded to a tropical storm tomorrow morning. Right now, again, just tropical depression number 5.